Hey everyone, welcome back. Tonight we're sneaking into a place that makes your worst hotel experience look like a 5-star resort. We're talking darker than a dungeon on a moonless night, with a smell that would make a barn animal file a formal complaint, and packed wall to wall with the kind of regret that doesn't wash off, mostly because soap is rationed. Welcome to the medieval brothel, where customer service goes to die and personal hygiene never bothered to show up. Before we go any further, if you enjoy drifting off to history that's equal parts disturbing and deeply factual, hit that like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is wherever you are. Now pull those blankets up, dim the lights, and let's go somewhere your history teacher definitely skipped. Ever wondered what life actually looked like inside one of these places? Not the romantic fantasy version with silk curtains and scented candles, the real version. The drafty, flea-ridden, soup of mysterious origin version. What did the workers wear? What did everyone eat? Did anyone ever actually sleep? How did people survive a place that ran on equal parts desperation, drama, and cheap ale? Let's find out. Part 1. Welcome to 1352, your new temporary home. Congratulations. You've somehow woken up in the middle of the 14th century, specifically in the middle of a medieval red light district. You're cold. You're confused. Your head is pounding from whatever passed for ale last night, a brew that contained more mold than hops and more mystery than flavor. And you've got an entire night ahead of you that will permanently recalibrate your appreciation for every boring, uneventful Tuesday you've ever lived through. You make your way through a narrow alleyway. The smell hits first, last year's cabbage, something that might be fish, and an optimistic layer of something floral thrown over the top of all of it, the way you might throw a blanket over a mess and call the room tidy. A flickering sign hangs above a door. The door itself creaks when you open it loudly, as if announcing your arrival to everyone inside and a few people on the street. Inside, the air is a collaboration of smoke from tallow candles, cheap perfume worn like a weapon, stale ale, and the collective nervous energy of at least a dozen people who are all, for some reason, using the name Marjorie tonight. Welcome to the medieval brothel. Please don't mind the rats. They were here before anyone else and they have absolutely no plans to leave. Let's set the scene properly. You've just walked in from a street that was making aggressive sounds. The crash of a tankard somewhere down the alley, the distant yelling of someone deeply upset about onions, and the unmistakable wet slap of a chamber pot being emptied from a window above. If you assumed this place was going to be some kind of romantic inn with a little extra atmosphere, adjust that assumption immediately. The medieval brothel was many things at once, part boarding house, part tavern, part fever dream, and entirely unlike anything a modern person would recognize as organized hospitality. It was a place where multiple functions overlapped in ways that would give a health inspector a complete breakdown. People came to sleep, to drink, to conduct suspicious business deals, to avoid their families, and yes, to pay for company. All of this happened under one roof with minimal ventilation, and absolutely no formal privacy policy. As you cross the threshold fully, your senses try to process the decor. The word decor is being used generously here. The furniture looks like it was gathered from several different eras and several different owners, most of whom either couldn't pay their tab or simply vanished one winter. A table near the wall leans slightly to one side, holding a single candle that appears to be in its final hours. Stools with questionable structural integrity are occupied by people with questionable moral priorities. A tapestry hangs on the far wall depicting something, a biblical scene perhaps, or possibly someone dropping a very large pie. In this light, it's genuinely impossible to tell. Someone in a bonnet approaches you. Their expression communicates, I have seen things that cannot be unseen, and you are not my problem unless you stop being a paying customer. They don't ask your name. Nobody cares about names tonight, which is fortunate because half the people in this room are using fake ones. What they do ask, immediately and without preamble is whether you're paying up front. You nod. Coins change hands. They're counted once, then again, and then disappeared into a pocket with the efficiency of someone who has been doing this since before you were born. There are no receipts. Your only proof of this transaction is the vague hope that the person who took your money will remember having done so. Let's talk about the other guests currently sharing this space with you. Near the bar, a traveling merchant is face down and snoring, having apparently lost both his purse and his shoes at some point during the evening. Two farm workers occupy a corner table, whispering to each other at a volume that the entire room can hear, debating whether or not to talk to Marjorie, though which Marjorie is currently a matter of some confusion since there appear to be several. A minor nobleman in an ill-fitting doublet is attempting to blend in as a regular person. He is not succeeding. His boots are the only footwear in the building that hasn't been chewed by rodents. You're shown to your room. The word room is also being used generously. It's a small, drafty space separated from the next small, drafty space by a curtain that is threadbare to the point of being more conceptual than functional. The mattress is a sack filled with straw, crunchy, uneven, and dotted with stains you choose not to investigate. A candle stub flickers on the floor near the wall, clearly in the late stages of its life, and honestly making peace with that. Your roommates for the evening include two cats of indeterminate color, one mouse with more confidence than any mouse should reasonably have, and a rooster who appears to be here against his will, and has opinions about this that he intends to share at 4 in the morning. Every sound in the building comes through the walls with perfect clarity, bowls scraping, coins clinking, a muffled argument about bread, laughter from somewhere that sounds increasingly unhinged as the night goes on. Through the curtain beside you, someone is either deeply upset or having a very good time, and the difference is genuinely difficult to determine from this side of the fabric. The madam appears eventually. She surveys you with the calm, evaluating gaze of someone who has personally removed more people from this building than she can count, and has never once lost sleep over any of them. She offers you wine. It arrives in a cup that has seen better decades, and the wine itself is thick, warm, and tastes like someone strained it through something that had also been used for other purposes. You drink it anyway, because the alternative is water from the well outside, and literally no one is recommending that. As the night deepens and the brothel fully comes alive around you, you find yourself thinking about your ordinary modern problems, slow internet, a subscription you forgot to cancel, milk that expired a day early, and feeling, perhaps for the first time, genuinely grateful for them. Because compared to lying awake in 1352 on a crunchy straw mattress while a rooster glares at you and a mouse conducts business near your feet, your normal problems are practically luxurious. Your first night in the medieval brothel has officially begun. If the rooster doesn't wake you at 3, the curtain debates will. Either way, good morning. You've survived history's least comfortable airbump. Part 2. The Madam, the real power in the room. Forget everything you think you know about medieval power structures. Kings ruled kingdoms, sure. Bishops commanded spiritual authority. Nobles collected land and debts. But none of them could silence a room with a single raised eyebrow. None of them ran something as genuinely complicated as a building full of workers with competing needs, customers with wildly unrealistic expectations, and livestock that didn't pay rent. The madam ran that. You spot her the moment you know where to look, which is wherever the chaos isn't. She moves through the room with the unhurried confidence of someone who has already accounted for every possible disaster and filed it away as someone else's problem. She's not rushing. She doesn't need to. The room reorganizes itself around her presence without anyone consciously deciding to do that. Her outfit is a masterpiece of accumulated authority, multiple eras of fabric stitched together into something that communicates power through sheer commitment to staying intact. Velvet somewhere, wool for the practical sections, and what appears to be pure determination holding the rest of it together. Her hair is immaculate. Not a single strand has gone rogue. The effect is quietly intimidating, like a building that looks perfectly calm until you realize the windows don't open. Her weapon of choice is a wooden spoon. This sounds less threatening than it is. This spoon has a history. It has broken up arguments, extracted confessions, stirred suspicious stew, and delivered sharp corrections to the knuckles of anyone who thought about paying in something other than actual money. It is simultaneously kitchen implement, communication device, and disciplinary tool, and she wields all three functions simultaneously without appearing to try. The madam's official duties begin before sunrise and technically never end. She maintains a ledger locked away, but honestly her memory is the more secure of the two options, tracking every booking, every debt, every outstanding favor, and every person who has ever tried to shortchange her with a foreign coin. That last category has its own dedicated section. She knows exactly how many coins came in last night, how many went out, and the precise reason for every discrepancy. She negotiates supply prices, manages worker disputes, coordinates the bribery schedule for local officials, and deals with whatever is currently wrong with the kitchen, which is always several things simultaneously. Her network of information would impress a professional spy. Neighbors, bored animals, and workers who have learned that sharing useful gossip comes with tangible rewards all feed information upward to her. She knows who visited last week and pretended not to. She knows whose husband was definitely not at the market when he said he was at the market. She knows that the city bailiff has a childhood nickname and a fondness for the good wine, which she strategically makes available during inspections. In arguments, she doesn't raise her voice. She simply appears at the edge of the dispute and waits. The argument dissolves on its own. People become suddenly very interested in being somewhere else. She runs a kind of therapeutic service alongside everything else, whether anyone asked for it or not. Workers come to her with heartbreak, financial crises, family problems, and what to do about the rooster. She dispenses advice with the tone of someone who has already seen how this ends and is mildly disappointed that you haven't figured it out yourself. The advice is often blunt. It is almost always correct. Workers grumble about her rules the way people grumble about weather, constantly, specifically, and without any real expectation that this will change anything. But when trouble arrives at the door, when the city guard shows up unannounced or a brawl threatens to spill past the curtain into the street, it's the madam everyone moves toward. She's the only person in the building who can simultaneously calm a furious customer, remind a worker of their contractual obligations, and convince the guard that everything here is completely ordinary, nothing to see, have some wine. She distributes loans when she must. She gives advice when she shouldn't have to. And after hours, reportedly, when no one is watching, she gives the occasional hug, though this is firmly denied and would never be mentioned in public. Without her, the roof would metaphorically cave in within a week. The stew would burn, the rooster would take over, and everyone would end up sleeping in the alley with the goats. Moral of this section: pay promptly, be polite, and never under any circumstances test the woman with the ledger. Part 3. The rules longer than a church sermon, enforced like law. Before you get comfortable, which, given the furniture situation, was unlikely anyway, someone hands you the house rules. They're written on a piece of parchment in ink of varying quality, suggesting different sections were added at different times under different levels of stress. Some rules have clearly been there since the building's earliest days. Others look freshly added, possibly after whatever happened last Tuesday involving the goose. Let's go through the highlights. Rule 1. No fighting inside the premises. This seems reasonable until you realize it needed to be written down, which means it wasn't always followed, which raises questions about what exactly happened before it became an official policy. Disputes are to be handled quietly. If a physical resolution is genuinely required, it should take place outside, away from the main road, preferably out of the sight line of any one official. Broken furniture is an expense the house doesn't absorb without consequence. Bruised feelings are handled with passive-aggressive silence, and whatever bread is left over. Rule 2. No free samples. The medieval brothel operates on a cash basis with zero flexibility on this particular point. Anyone caught providing services without corresponding payment is immediately assigned to laundry duty, which involves boiling bed linens in a cauldron large enough to comfortably fit a person's entire sense of dignity. No one has tested whether this is a deterrent exactly once. Rule 3. No credit, ever. Cash up front or nothing. The madam has heard every variation of "I'll pay you next time" that exists in the medieval vernacular, and she has developed a facial expression in response to each of them. This expression communicates with remarkable precision that she remembers the last 12 times this exact speech was given and the precise details of what happened afterward. Bartering is not an option. Promising chickens, firewood, or future favors will result in you being shown the door with a speed that suggests practice. Rule 4. No singing after midnight. This rule was introduced after a specific incident involving an enthusiastic apprentice bard, a 12-verse song about turnips, and a neighborhood that expressed its opinions loudly and with objects. The song was, reportedly, extremely catchy for the first 4 minutes. By verse 7, people were making structural complaints. The consequences for violating this rule now include floor mopping, animal wrangling, and a temporary exile from soup privileges, which sounds minor until you realize soup is the only meal. Rule 5. Do not steal the soap. This one is both practical and philosophical. The soap is a communal resource, a shrinking, grayish lump of uncertain origin that carries the combined scents of approximately 5 previous soaps and smells vaguely of wet sheep and regret. It is rationed carefully. Workers receive supervised access during designated washing times. Guests are permitted limited contact under supervision. Anyone caught with unauthorized extra soap access will be identified immediately, because they will be the only person in the building who smells different from everyone else. The soap situation deserves a moment of additional context. In a world where bathing once a month is normal and twice a month suggests suspicious wealth or an upcoming social event, the existence of house soap at all is practically a luxury amenity. Do not take it for granted. Do not take it at all. Rule 6. No livestock upstairs. Added after an incident the older workers reference only as the bucket situation and refuse to elaborate on, involves a chicken, 2 goats, and ale. The stains never fully came out. Then there are the unwritten rules, absorbed through observation rather than instruction. Don't ask what's in the stew. Don't comment on someone's real name, especially if they've introduced themselves as Marjorie with the specific calm of someone who has been Marjorie for several months now. And if the rooster comes inside, leave him alone. He has seniority. These rules exist because without them, every night would end in at least one small fire and a furniture shortage. The madam enforces them not because she believes in rules as an abstract principle, but because she has personally seen what happens in their absence, and she found it exhausting. Part 4. The dress code: less lace, more lice. If you're picturing a medieval brothel full of velvet and mystery, silk robes and elaborate accessories, the dramatic imagery of period dramas and romantic paintings, please stop. That image is doing a lot of work that reality simply refuses to support. The actual dress code of a medieval brothel is governed by 2 principles: what is warm enough to wear and what hasn't yet fallen apart. These 2 criteria significantly narrow the options. The primary fabric in the house is linen, or rather, what used to be linen before extended use, enthusiastic laundering, and the passage of time transformed it into something better described as historically determined fabric. The color is nominally beige. though years of accumulated stains and the specific mysteries of medieval washing methods have shifted most of it into territory that resists easy categorization. That decorative fraying along the edges isn't intentional distressing for aesthetic effect. It's just the edge of the fabric surrendering to reality. Over the linen, there's usually a woolen overdress in a state that could generously be called well-loved, and less generously called evidence that someone gave up. The patches on the patches have begun developing their own patches. If there's an apron, it's functional rather than decorative. A borrowed shawl might appear for warmth, scratchy and of unknown origin, useful mainly for concealing the fact that your sleeves are different lengths. Clothing in the brothel circulates between workers the way rumors circulate between customers, freely, frequently, and with no particular loyalty to original ownership. Every garment has lived multiple lives and absorbed the stories of each one. Shoes are a shared experiment. The house maintains a small rotating pool of footwear, battered, mismatched, perpetually damp in ways that cannot be fully explained. Some have holes. Several have lace situations that require advanced planning. Many workers simply go barefoot, which works fine until you step on something sharp in the dark, at which point you develop a sudden and passionate appreciation for the concept of indoor shoes. Now the true accessories of the medieval brothel wardrobe: lice. Not metaphorical lice. Actual lice, present in every hem, collar, and structural crease of every garment in the building. In a world where bathing is infrequent by necessity and combs are a relatively rare object, lice are simply part of the textile landscape. Scratching is so continuous and so universal that it functions as a kind of ambient background rhythm, the soft, persistent percussion underlying all other sounds in the house. Nobody comments on it. It would be like commenting on the weather. It's just the condition of existing here. Jewelry is minimal and practical. A scrap of ribbon functions as decoration. A bit of colored glass on string does double duty as ornament and lucky charm. A pin is kept for protection or for discouraging customers who forget that personal space exists as a concept. Any actual gold in the house was left behind by someone leaving quickly, and was immediately claimed by the madam for what she describes as communal improvement funds, and what the workers describe as the madam's hat collection. Hair is kept functional, pulled back, hidden under a cap, or braided to prevent it from entering the communal soup, which is already dealing with enough. Lice treatments are creative and optimistic. Vinegar rinses, garlic applications, prayers to saints with applicable jurisdictions. The communal brush exists, but is treated with the specific wariness of an object that has been through too much. So the next time you find yourself complaining about your wardrobe situation, remember the medieval brothel dress code. Fewer buttons, more patches, and the only thing more persistent than the stains is the stories behind them. Part 5. The Clientele, a parade of questionable decis. Every night the door opens and in comes another chapter of medieval society in all its complicated, unwashed glory. Merchants, soldiers, exhausted travelers, and a truly remarkable number of clergy who arrive with explanations that satisfy nobody. Each guest brings their own specific scent, their own bargaining strategy, and their own particular brand of medieval misunderstanding. Let's take a tour. The merchants arrive with the confidence of men who believe money gives them personality. Their fingernails are slightly cleaner than everyone else's, which is the medieval equivalent of a prestigious credential. They claim to be passing through on urgent business, which is technically true if urgent business includes memorizing the house's entire drink special lineup over the course of multiple previous visits. Their negotiating technique involves spending 20 minutes arguing about prices, then tipping with a foreign coin that cannot be spent anywhere in this country. They love to talk, mostly about themselves. Specifically about the time they almost completed a trade deal with a minor noble who sadly died, the cause of death ranging between plague, bad luck, and a soup-related incident, depending on how many drinks the merchant has had. The soldiers arrive in groups and carry the atmosphere of every road they've traveled on them, embedded in their clothing and possibly their skin at this point. The phrase "smelling like victory" takes on a new and very specific meaning in their presence. They are loud, confident, and under the impression that this confidence is charming. Their idea of a pleasant evening involves arguing loudly about who gets the least lumpy corner of the straw mattress and calling this a romantic gesture. If you need news about regional conflicts, recent battles, or which towns have been burned down lately, these are your sources. If you need them to remember your name or their own by morning, look elsewhere. The travelers are the hollow-eyed ones who shuffle through the door carrying a walking stick, a bag of disappointments, and a blanket that has the texture of dried fish and the smell to match. They are not here for conversation or entertainment. They are here because it's raining, because they've been walking for 4 days, and because this building has a roof and the pottage is hot, and those two facts are sufficient. Travelers don't complain much. They're too exhausted to notice if the stew contains unusual protein sources, and they will sleep through anything, including what someone optimistically called musical entertainment, at 11 o'clock at night. The clergy. There are always clergy, more clergy than you would expect in a place that their institution officially condemns. They arrive with explanations that range from spiritual wellness checks to casual observations about the neighborhood to the deeply committed claim that they are simply here for the soup. No one believes any of this. No one says so directly, because creating awkward moments with clergy in medieval Europe was a calculated social risk. The clergy who are regulars have developed elaborate rituals around their visits, arriving with theological commentary, leaving coin, and departing at sunrise with a renewed commitment to silence on the subject. Some of them actually are just there for the soup. These are the ones the cook finds exhausting. Beyond the regulars, there are the occasional special guests. The nobleman in disguise, always badly, always wearing one item of clothing that costs more than everything else in the room combined and ruins the entire performance. He will attempt to pay with a promise, a poem, or an invitation to a feast that almost certainly doesn't exist. When identified, he claims to be a shepherd. Everyone plays along. The entertainment value is worth it. There are the chronically broke locals who show up every week with a new story about why tonight specifically is not a good night for payment, but next time will definitely be different. One lost his money to a pickpocket. One is in mourning for a pig. One has a complicated theory about the moon and Tuesdays. The madam keeps a separate section of her ledger for these individuals. They end up doing chores. Medieval for indefinitely. And then there are the random visitors, wandering students, runaway apprentices, traveling musicians who came in from the rain and haven't left. They carry news from other places, small instruments and fresh populations of insects. They don't stay long, but they always leave something behind, usually a story, sometimes a stain, occasionally a song that the house will be singing for the next 3 weeks whether it wants to or not. Part 6. Hygiene, a rumor, a legend, a distant hope. Let's dismantle the fantasy completely and permanently. There is no scented bath situation happening here. There are no rose petals. There is no warm towel waiting for you. There is a leaky barrel in the yard that was previously used for wine and is now used for everything else, and access to it is structured around principles of fairness and desperation. Personal hygiene in the medieval brothel exists on a spectrum that begins at minimal and extends down from there. The bath situation is this. The barrel holds water. The water starts lukewarm if you are first in line, which you won't be. By the second bather, the temperature has dropped and the water has gained a character. By the third, it is less a bath and more a collective memorial to everyone who came before. On busy nights, the barrel processes an impressive number of people in sequence with no water change between them, because changing the water requires both effort and a reliable water source, and the house has neither. The soap, we've touched on this, but it deserves revisiting, is a communal nub of mystery substance that smells like wet sheep in conversation with overcooked onions. It is distributed in slivers. Extra soap time is considered a disciplinary violation. Taking more than your allocation is noticed immediately because you will smell different from everyone else, and in this building, different is suspicious. For most people most nights, hygiene consists of a quick rinse of hands and face, completed in under 2 minutes, and then the strategic application of whatever scented substance is available to cover whatever can't be washed. Lavender if you're fortunate. Something else if you're not. Full body washing is reserved for significant occasions, high religious holidays, visits from important customers, or periods when the smell situation has gotten notably worse than baseline. The communal scent profile of the brothel is a layered experience. Sweat, tallow from the candles, old ale, damp wool, and whatever herb someone threw on the fire last week all combine into an ambient aroma that you stop noticing after approximately 20 minutes of exposure. Guests arrive carrying their own aromatic contributions. Travelers with road dust and horse, soldiers with campaign mud and ambition, merchants with strong cologne that was purchased specifically to perform cleanliness, and actually just adds a new layer to the existing situation. Lice and fleas are not pests here. They are residents, long-term, established residents who pay nothing and complain constantly. Dealing with them is a communal activity, conducted during downtime, often while gossiping, pick and tell, essentially, where you remove things from each other's hair and exchange information simultaneously. It's efficient and social, and says something important about human adaptability that we should probably appreciate. Respiratory illness moves through the building continuously because ventilation is limited and customers arrive from everywhere bringing regional cold variations with them. When someone starts coughing, the house response is to pour them some ale and light another candle, because candlelight seems safer than thinking about what's being shared in this air. Sleeves function as handkerchiefs. This is the state of things. The bathhouse across town exists as an option. It is more expensive, frequently closed for unclear reasons, occasionally banned by local authorities, and entirely public in ways that make the entire experience a social calculation. Running into the bishop at the bathhouse when you work at the brothel is a specific kind of awkward that nobody wants to navigate before breakfast. The bedding gets changed occasionally. Clothing gets rinsed when it has clearly reached a threshold. Fresh rushes are put down on the floor when the old ones have absorbed too much of everything. Between major cleanings, strategic placement of dried herbs, rosemary, lavender, whatever's available, provides the medieval equivalent of an air freshener, which is to say it changes the smell without actually addressing the underlying situation. Health in this environment is a negotiation between what is happening and what you choose to acknowledge. The winner of this negotiation is usually whatever is happening. Part 7. The Shared Bedroom, a masterclass in collective suffering. Privacy in the medieval brothel is not a service available at any price point. It is simply not a thing that exists in this building in any meaningful sense. The concept of a private room, your own space, your own air, your own uninterrupted silence, is the kind of abstract luxury that people here would genuinely struggle to visualize. The shared bedroom is what happens when you solve the problem of too many people, not enough structure, with a combination of curtains and mutual resignation. The curtains are threadbare, not thin, not sheer. Threadbare in the original sense, worn down to threads, performing the function of a visual barrier while thoroughly abandoning the function of an acoustic one. Everything that happens on one side of the curtain is fully audible on the other. If you were hopping for quiet, this is not the room. If you were hopping for a room at all, you're in the right building and this is as good as it gets. Your sleeping surface is a pallet, a rough mat filled with straw that has opinions about your comfort, and has chosen to express those opinions through uneven pressure distribution and sound effects every time you move. The straw is old enough to have calcified in places. The fabric containing it is stained in patterns that suggest a rich history you are choosing not to investigate. The room's other permanent residents are the animals. The chickens are nominally supposed to stay outside. The chickens have not been informed of this and would not comply if they were. They have decided that the room is theirs by right of long residence and temperature preference, and they express this ownership by roosting on whatever human surface is available, commenting loudly on everything, and providing a 4 in the morning wake-up service that nobody requested and nobody appreciates. Finding an egg in your bedding is either a gift or a spatial complaint. It's difficult to know which. The goat occupies a specific corner near the fire. Nobody knows the precise moment when this became his corner. It simply became so, through the gradual accumulation of presence and the communication of a level of confidence that discouraged questions. He guards his blanket. He glares at anyone who comes too close. The madam claims he is spiritually useful, a deterrent against negative forces. Workers suspect he is simply an animal with a personality disorder and convenient proximity to the best heat source. The goat has his corner. That's settled. Then there's whatever the dog has decided to sleep on tonight, which is whatever is softest and warmest, regardless of whether that thing belongs to someone or someone is already using it. Brutus makes his determination and commits to it, and arguing with 120 pounds of sleeping mastiff is a battle nobody has the energy for at 2 in the morning. The overnight soundtrack includes snoring in multiple registers, the rustle of straw as someone else gives up on sleep and changes position, low conversations in the next space over, the creaking of the floor as someone navigates to the chamber pot behind the curtain that theoretically provides acoustic privacy, but doesn't, a chicken suddenly alarmed by something only it can perceive, and the goat shifting position and judging everyone silently. Temperature management is an ongoing negotiation. In winter, everyone moves toward the middle, toward each other, toward the fire, toward anything generating warmth. The result is a communal sleeping arrangement of surprising intimacy that no one discusses openly. In summer, the problem reverses. Bodies and animals and confined space create a warmth that has nowhere to go, and the window provides just enough airflow to maintain hope without actually improving anything. Sleep technically does occur, but it arrives in installments, interrupted regularly, and never quite adds up to the amount you needed. By morning, the condition you are in is best described as technically rested, in the way that a camping trip in a thunderstorm is technically the same as a night under a roof. And yet, in this crowded, noisy, thermally complicated space, something real happens. Conversations in the dark, laughter that someone tried to suppress and couldn't, the particular closeness that comes from surviving something together that was equally inconvenient for everyone involved. It's not comfortable, but it is, in its way, community. Part 8, the night shift, when the building truly wakes up. The sun drops below the crooked roofline of the alley, and the brothel transforms. What was, in daylight, a somewhat chaotic boarding house with ambiguous food and very strong opinions about soap, becomes something else entirely. A working, breathing center of medieval nightlife, running on candlelight and necessity. The common room fills in stages. Merchants arrive, dropping into chairs with the ease of regulars. Soldiers come in groups, immediately rearranging the furniture in a way nobody asked for. The clergy drift in with the practiced casual energy of people absolutely not doing what they are very clearly doing. Workers who have been resting being a relative term when you share a room with 2 chickens and a goat with insomnia, reappear and shift into performance mode. Because that's what the night shift is, a performance. Everything is calculated, the smile practiced and deployed, the laugh timed for effect, the conversation calibrated for exactly how much honesty is useful and exactly how much performance is more so. After years of doing this, the distinction between authentic and performed becomes blurry, not because the person disappears, but because the skills become so embedded they stop feeling like skills. You just know when to lean in, when to step back, when to laugh, and when to redirect. The oil lamps work hard against the darkness and don't entirely win. The light they produce is golden and inconsistent, casting certain angles in warmth and letting other corners stay shadowed. This is either atmospheric or just insufficiently lit, depending on where you're standing. Shadows collect in corners, which is convenient for people conducting conversations they'd rather not have in full visibility. The soundtrack is medieval nightlife at full volume. The snap of firewood in the hearth, the clink of coins counted and recounted by people who don't quite trust the first count, low conversation that occasionally escalates into something louder, and the ambient sound of people working very hard to seem relaxed. For workers, the night is a marathon. Every interaction requires something: attention, warmth, humor, patience, the ability to diffuse a situation that is becoming a situation without anyone noticing it become a situation. Brawls need to not happen, or if they start, need to stop before the madam has to get involved, because madam involvement comes with consequences for everyone. Drinks need to pour. Songs need to happen. The fire needs to be kept going. The animals need to be managed. Customers need to feel welcomed regardless of how welcome they actually are. Breaks are theoretical and brief. A moment in the cold air of the yard, face splashed with water, standing on a crate of root vegetables and permitting yourself 30 seconds of existing outside the performance. Then back in. By the time the last customer staggers out and the final candle is snuffed, there's still work to do. Bedding to sort, coins to count, whatever animal escaped during the evening to locate and return to its unofficial territory. The tail end of a shift is less dramatic than the main event, but requires its own specific stamina, the kind that comes from sheer persistence rather than energy, because energy is long gone. Dawn announces itself through the small windows, pale gray first and then warmer. You realize, looking at it, that you don't remember a night this week that was genuinely uninterrupted. Sleep is theoretical here. The night shift isn't a job. It's a sustained exercise in existing under pressure, and you've done it again. Part 9. The food pottage always pottage, and the occasional mystery. Let us be absolutely clear. Eating in a medieval brothel is not a culinary experience. It is a survival experience with culinary elements. The distinction matters. Pottage is the foundation of every meal. Every single meal. The same battered cauldron sits over the same fire, accepting whatever can be found and converting it into something hot and filling, and not particularly concerned with your opinions about texture. The cauldron is seasoned with years of accumulated cooking in ways that are either flavor or history, depending on your philosophy. The ingredients rotate based on what's available, what's left over, and what can no longer be sold as a separate item. Carrots at the end of their lifespan, onions from the very bottom of the storage sack, barley, whatever kind of bean could be located, and meat labeled according to what sounds plausible, which changes weekly. Pigeon is a popular designation. Rabbit appears occasionally. What's actually in there on any given Tuesday is a matter of faith rather than verification. The texture is not smooth. It is not silky. It does not have layers of flavor that reveal themselves as it cools. It is lumpy in ways that raise questions and hearty in ways that you gradually stop noticing. The color depends on what went in this week and ranges from a brownish functional to a concerning greenish that everyone agrees to eat anyway because it's hot and it's there. The bread is the second element of every meal and requires special attention as a subject. Medieval brothel bread is dense, gray, and aggressively stale by the time it reaches your hands. Dropping it produces either a sharp crack or a structural impact, depending on the stage of staleness. Cutting it requires both a knife with conviction and genuine upper body investment. Fresh bread is an event, celebrated with the kind of collective relief that suggests no one was entirely confident it would happen. Butter is for tax brackets this establishment does not occupy. Cheese appears occasionally as a bribe or a special occasion marker. There is no dessert. This is stated clearly up front so you don't spend the meal anticipating one. If you find a wrinkled apple, that's dessert. A dried fig counts. The concept of a sweet course is a rumor from somewhere with significantly different economics. The drinks are weak ale or watered wine, with occasional access to something stronger on nights when someone managed to bring it in without the madam noticing, which she always does, but sometimes permits for strategic reasons. Water is not served because the water cannot be trusted, a fact that everyone accepts with the cheerfulness of people who have made peace with the available options. Dinner is loud and communal and full of the specific conversation that happens when everyone is exhausted and hungry and sharing a table out of necessity. The gossip flows. The bread is traded. Someone's bowl gets the suspicious extra protein evaluated by the entire table. The cook, who has heard every complaint and developed immunity to all of them, presides over the kitchen with the authority of someone who controls the only hot food in the building, and everyone knows it. Food poisoning is common enough that it has regional nicknames and everyone recognizes the early symptoms and responds with sympathy and strategic distance. The kitchen itself is a functioning miracle, one fire, one pot, never thoroughly cleaned, a collection of implements that have done time, and a cook who has long since stopped being surprised by anything. You eat what arrives. You eat it without too many questions. You are grateful it's hot. These are the operating principles. Part 10. Security. The dog is the bouncer and the dog is serious. Let's address the security situation directly. There is one bouncer, he has 4 legs, and his name is Brutus. If you were picturing a large human with crossed arms and a permanent scowl positioned at the entrance, revise that image. Replace the human with a mastiff of considerable dimensions. Replace the crossed arms with jowls that could frighten small children into better life choices. And replace the permanent scowl with the specific expression of an animal that has seen everything and decided most of it wasn't worth getting up for. Brutus is ancient by dog standards and entirely unbothered by this. He is wide as a wheelbarrow, dense as ambition, and moves through the world with the unhurried confidence of something that has never once considered the possibility of losing a confrontation. His sleeping spots are chosen by him and defended by physics. Moving 120 pounds of sleeping mastiff is not a project most people start voluntarily. His job description, as far as anyone can reconstruct it, goes roughly like this: sleep in doorways. Perform detailed aromatic assessments of all entering guests. Emit a low, sustained rumble at anyone who looks like trouble or smells like they're planning something. Follow up on all unattended food situations with appropriate urgency. The aromatic assessment is the medieval version of a security check. Brutus sniffs every arriving guest with the focus of a professional evaluating evidence. What he's looking for is unclear, but he seems to know when he finds it. Regular customers who have been properly vetted get a resigned sniff and a cleared path. Strangers who carry something suspicious, either in their bag or in their attitude, receive extended attention and a stare of sufficient intensity that most people decide to clarify their intentions immediately. The madam believes Brutus can detect dishonesty by observing the small, involuntary movements of guilty feet. This theory has never been formally tested, but it also hasn't been disproven, and Brutus has an unusually good track record on the matter. Inside the building, Brutus patrols according to his own internal schedule, which corresponds entirely to food location and optimal warmth. His route through the common room serves the incidental function of reminding everyone of his presence, which is itself a deterrent. A dog this large, moving calmly through a space, has a quieting effect on people considering whether or not to start something. When a conflict does break out, and in a medieval brothel, conflicts break out with the regularity of rain, Brutus's intervention technique is both effective and slightly absurd. He walks to the center of the dispute. He sits down. He looks at both parties in turn with an expression so weighted with tired disappointment that most arguments simply run out of energy and collapse. For the situations that survive this initial treatment, he applies his considerable rear end to the problem, positioning himself between combatants and leaning gently, but with great conviction toward whichever one is being more difficult. The physics of this are persuasive. The other security measures in the building are symbolic at best. A wooden club behind the bar is more frequently used for stirring purposes than defensive ones. A sword above the entrance has been there long enough to become decorative, and its practical threat level is substantially lower than Brutus's morning breath. The madam owns a whistle, which she claims is for emergency use. Workers believe it is specifically for calling the dog, which amounts to the same thing. The psychological contribution of Brutus to overall house security may be his most significant. Everyone in the district knows the brothel is guarded by an animal with no concept of mercy regarding snacks, an acute sensitivity to dishonesty, and a relationship with personal space that is entirely one-directional. This information circulates. Petty thieves do their math and usually find better options elsewhere. He is not perfect. He occasionally mistakes a paying customer for a delivery person and detains them in an informal capacity near the entrance until someone intervenes. His policy on cats is total intolerance, which creates periodic scenes when one wanders in from the street. And he once spent an entire afternoon performing security operations on a cured ham instead of the door, which was both a lapse in professional judgment and entirely in character. But he earns his bones. He does his job. And in a building where the formal security budget consists of one dog, some optimism, and the madam's glare, that's everything. Part 11. The law, a game of negotiation with no fixed rules. Operating a medieval brothel requires a specific and ongoing relationship with legal authority. Not a relationship built on compliance exactly, but something more like a continuous, low-stakes negotiation conducted through bribery, performance, and mutual pretense. The legal status of the brothel on any given day exists somewhere on a spectrum, tolerated as a necessary social function, officially condemned as a moral problem, or actively targeted as a political opportunity. The position shifts without notice and frequently without logic. What was acceptable last month may be a serious violation this month because someone important needs a distraction or the bishop is feeling particularly energetic about sin. Operating successfully under these conditions requires multiple simultaneous strategies. Strategy 1. The bribe. This is the foundation of everything else and is deployed with the precision of long practice. The madam maintains a specific fund for this purpose, stored with the layered security that the situation demands. When official visitors arrive, the bailiff, the town constable, any representative of local authority who shows up with a clipboard or the general energy of someone conducting an inspection, the protocol activates immediately. Someone offers a seat, someone provides a drink, the good wine not the usual, and then, with the smooth casualness of a transaction that is absolutely ordinary and definitely not what it is, a small pouch moves from one side of the table to the other. The conversation that accompanies this exchange is conducted entirely in code. Is the house in good order tonight? Is not a question about the house. We've done a thorough sweep recently is not a statement about cleaning. Everyone involved understands everything and acknowledges nothing. The bailiff in question is referred to by the madam using a childhood nickname, because she's known him since before either of them had this much responsibility, and this detail communicates more about the relationship than anything else does. Strategy 2. The church performance. The church sends representatives with their own agendas, their own authority, and their own carefully maintained fictions about why they're present. When a priest arrives in official capacity, the house responds with a counter-performance of equivalent commitment. Workers produce prayer books from locations that suggest the books are consulted regularly. Customers assume expressions of moderate spiritual reflection. Someone starts a prayer loud enough to be heard through the window by any passing neighbors. The visiting priest delivers his condemnation of the establishment, collects a donation for the orphanage that happens to be staffed by his extended family, and departs with both his dignity and a reasonable understanding that this arrangement works for everyone. Strategy 3. The raid response. Occasionally, actual raids happen. Something shifts in local politics, someone needs a public demonstration of moral authority, and suddenly the brothel is the target of official intervention. The early warning system for this is the neighborhood itself, a network of people whose own continued operations depend on information moving quickly. Someone comes running, usually breathless, sometimes only barely ahead of whoever they're warning about. The house response is immediate and well-rehearsed. Anything incriminating disappears with impressive speed. Better wine goes into hiding. The coins that were just visible on the table become a charitable collection. The guest book develops entirely fictional entries about agricultural transactions. Customers who have no official reason to be present discover sudden urgent needs elsewhere, specifically through the back door. Workers adopt whatever occupation seems most appropriate and thoroughly innocent. Floor scrubbing is popular. Sock repair. Someone is always available to be discovered in the act of feeding the animals, which has never once resulted in a criminal charge. If the bailiff insists on a thorough inspection despite all of this, Brutus meets him at the stairs. This is not accidental. Strategy 4. The confusion defense. When avoidance fails and someone ends up answering questions, the approach shifts to sustained ambient confusion. Everyone has a story, none of the stories match, and all of them are delivered with the calm confidence of people telling the truth. The goal is not to convince but to outlast, to make the documentation of this interaction more effort than it's worth. The record for the longest interrogation that ended without any charges was 2 hours, and concluded with the official in question buying drinks for the staff, and leaving with no clearer understanding of anything than when he arrived. The law comes and goes, cracks down and retreats, demands and accepts. Through all of it, the brothel continues by being exactly what it has always been, complicated enough to be inconvenient to prosecute, useful enough to be inconvenient to close, and connected enough to know when something is about to change before it changes. The line between legal and illegal here isn't a line at all. It's a negotiation conducted constantly, in both directions, by everyone involved. When all else fails, blame Marjorie. Part 12. Health, the full catalogue of things going wrong. Medieval brothel healthcare begins with the acknowledgement that the word healthcare is doing significant work in this sentence. What actually exists is a combination of home remedies, folk wisdom, optimistic superstition, and the occasional intervention from a professional whose qualifications are best described as willing. The permanent health conditions of the house are well established and managed through a combination of acceptance and distraction. Lice are always present, as we've discussed. They are managed through communal grooming, vinegar applications, and garlic rubbed on various surfaces. The results are partial. The lice adapt. Everyone reaches a détente. Respiratory illness is continuous. The ventilation situation ensures that whatever arrives with one customer is efficiently distributed to everyone else within about 48 hours. Colds are treated with ale, candles, and the hope that the body will eventually sort it out, which it usually does, eventually, after a week of making everyone nearby aware of its progress. The specialist hazards, the ones that arrive specifically with the nature of the work, are treated with whatever the apothecary is currently selling, which tends toward the dramatic in name and the ineffective in outcome. St. Agnes's purifying tonic, Maid's Comfort, the blessed infusion. These are expensive, taste specifically terrible, and do approximately nothing, which everyone suspects but nobody says because hope requires some object to attach itself to. Injuries are frequent. A busy environment, low light, and the presence of actual animals all contribute to a steady supply of bruises, sprains, cuts, and the occasional more dramatic incident involving a customer who confused enthusiasm for appropriate behavior. The response to injuries is practical and unsentimental. Clean it with what's available, bind it with what's around. Take the advice of whoever has dealt with something similar before, and get back to work as soon as the relevant limb can be convinced to cooperate. For serious wounds, the options are honey applied with herbs' medieval miracle substance, genuinely somewhat effective as an antimicrobial, the clean rag approach, outcome highly variable, or in worse cases, the hot iron cauterization, which is exactly what it sounds like, administered with the specific bedside manner of someone who knows this is going to be bad and has decided to move quickly through it. Anesthesia is a stick to bite down on, and a reminder that the neighbors are listening. The barber surgeon serves the district. He cuts hair, pulls teeth, performs the occasional bloodletting, and on ambitious days, attempts procedures that would cause modern surgical theaters to experience collective concern. His qualification for all of this is that he owns the relevant sharp objects and has done it before. His patients are encouraged to define success broadly. Superstition fills the considerable gap between what medicine can do and what people need medicine to do. Burying a toad under the front step for one category of illness. A silver coin held in the mouth for fever. Specific herbs hung above the door against plague, bad luck, and persistent officials. The madam keeps a sprig of rue above the entrance that she claims covers all three simultaneously. The kitchen functions as a secondary medical facility in that all remedies are produced there. Boiled willow bark for headache, actually effective, though the taste is designed to make you reconsider complaining. Poppy seed preparations for sleep, effective in small quantities, disorienting in larger ones. Onion poultices for everything from bruises to infections. Garlic for prophylactic purposes so broad they approach general existence. Workers develop real expertise in this area through practice and observation, which treatments actually help, which are harmless theater, and which require the specific warning, use less than you think you need. This knowledge passes between workers the way all useful knowledge does here. In conversation, around shared tasks, during the communal grooming sessions that are simultaneously practical and social. Mental health, what we would call that, exists under different names here. Exhaustion is a permanent condition. Anxiety about raids, debts, illness, and the general insecurity of a life with no structural safety net is woven into the baseline of daily experience. There's no formal name for this and no formal treatment. What exists is the community, the conversations in the dark, the shared laughter at the worst moments, the specific solidarity of people surviving the same difficult thing together. It's not sufficient, but it's real and it does work in the incomplete way that available things do. Part 13. The economics everyone owes something always. The financial architecture of the medieval brothel is elegant in its way. Everything flows in, most of it flows right back out through channels that the madam controls, and what remains is just enough to justify another day of operation. Workers line up after the night shift for their earnings. The accounting happens in front of everyone, which is either transparency or entertainment depending on your perspective. The madam's finger moves down the ledger with the pace of someone who knows exactly what every line says and is waiting to see if you do too. First, the house cut. This percentage is not fixed and is not subject to negotiation. It adjusts for circumstances, the current state of the roof, recent breakage, the latest fine paid to local authorities, and occasionally what appears to be the general atmospheric conditions. If something went wrong this week and money was spent fixing it, that cost finds its way into the calculation. This is accepted because the alternative is being homeless in medieval Europe, which is worse. Second, Brutus. He doesn't take currency. He takes bones from the previous night's cooking, a warm sleeping spot, and the first choice of where to lie down. The cost of keeping Brutus happy is paid in scraps and diplomacy, small offerings from workers who want his goodwill on cold nights, bribes of cheese from people who need to get past him when he's decided the hallway is his. This is an informal but real economic system operating alongside the formal one. Third, rent. Your sleeping spot, a straw pallet in a shared room, not especially comfortable, shared with animals and other workers, costs a portion of your weekly earnings. This is fixed. Not paying it means chores, extra shifts, or the specific humiliation of wearing the communal spare tunic while yours is held as informal collateral. The madam invented several of these consequences and enforces them with creative consistency. What's left after these deductions is not much. Enough for something small at the market, a piece of fruit, a slightly better quality pair of socks, a sliver of soap purchased as a personal luxury rather than a communal entitlement. Most workers save by hiding money in the most inventive places available, sewn into hems, tucked into old footwear, buried in the animal enclosure. The goat is widely suspected of knowing about at least some of these locations and operating some kind of side arrangement. Supplementary income exists. Side services, fortune-telling, laundry work for customers, singing at specific events, generate extra coin. The madam takes a percentage of these too, which she calls a management fee and everyone else calls inevitable. Debt is a permanent feature of the landscape. Fines, unexpected expenses, a bad run of luck at dice, or simply a slow week can spiral into a cycle of obligations that compounds faster than anyone planned. The madam tracks all of it. Interest is implied rather than specified, which somehow makes it feel more present rather than less. The house expenses are constant and considerable. Bribes for ongoing official goodwill, religious donations for ongoing spiritual goodwill, firewood, candles, ale in bulk, food supplies, and the perpetual cost of maintaining a building that was not built to last as long as it has. Money flows in through the door every night and out through all these channels, and the books balance in the house's favor by design. Workers who have been here long enough understand the math. Getting rich is not the outcome. The outcome is survival with slightly better conditions than the alternatives, and on good weeks, a small coin set aside for the boot or the hem or whatever hiding spot has been most successful lately. The house always wins. Everyone knows it. The game is to stay in the game long enough that winning becomes a relative concept. Part 14. Entertainment. The show must go on whether it should or not. When business slows, which happens, around the time the ale runs low and the last confident customer has made his exit, the brothel finds its own entertainment with the resourcefulness of people who have no other options and considerable imagination. The starting point is always music. Someone stands up, usually after enough drinks to dissolve most social inhibition. They begin singing, a song about lost love, betrayal, a terrible merchant, or sometimes a goat that somehow became the protagonist of a longer story than anyone anticipated. The audience joins without necessarily knowing the words, filling in the gaps with approximations and confidence. The resulting harmony is achieved accidentally, if at all, and is valued entirely for the participation it represents. The house's best singer is, improbably, one of the kitchen staff. She claims a prior performance for someone of minor nobility. The documentation for this claim is thin. Her voice, however, cuts through smoke and noise and the ambient sound of other people's bad decisions with a clarity that stops conversations and holds them for as long as she wants. She also reserves the right to change the lyrics mid-performance when a better option presents itself, usually something that involves the current clientele in unflattering ways that they laugh at because it's funnier to be in on the joke than outside it. When music exhausts itself, the puppet show begins. This is produced with whatever materials are available: socks with button eyes, straw figures, a turnip rendered expressive by paint. The storylines are loosely based on recent local events, with embellishments calibrated for maximum comedic effect and minimum legal consequence. If you are the subject of tonight's performance, you receive a wooden spoon at the end as a consolation prize, and a reminder that being a character in the communal story is the price of interesting behavior. The juggling, is a risk management exercise for the audience. Theory, juggling is impressive. In practice in this building, by this particular person who has had this many drinks, juggling means that objects are going to leave controlled trajectories, and the people nearby need to make choices. Candle holders, bread rolls, and on memorable occasions, a chicken that expressed its own opinions about the situation have all been pressed into juggling service. The dog has learned to hide under the table at the first sign of someone pushing furniture aside to make space. The chicken in question remains ambivalent about humans in a way that can be traced to this experience. Games occupy the quieter stretches. Dice, which are never quite as fair as advertised. Card games governed by rules that shift with the confidence of whoever's currently winning. A guessing game called "What is that smell?" that has never produced a verified correct answer but generates reliable participation. On the specific occasion when a loot materializes, someone borrowed it, found it, won it, or simply arrived carrying one. The entire building reorganizes around the sound of actual music played on an actual instrument, with dancing that is enthusiastic in inverse proportion to its technical quality. Gossip fills the gap when everything else has run its course. Information is currency here, and story trading is both entertainment and economy. A fresh rumor delivered well is worth a drink. A well-told story about someone in the room, featuring enough accurate detail to be recognizable and enough embellishment to be interesting, is worth the room's attention for as long as it takes to tell it. 3 different versions of the same event will circulate by midnight, each one more dramatic than the last, and by morning the story has achieved a final form that may not resemble the original event at all, but is significantly more entertaining. The brothel has no stage. It has no scheduled programming. It has no professional entertainers on retainer. What it has is a group of people who know that laughter is the cheapest and most effective medicine available, and who have enough collective creativity and desperation to produce it out of whatever the evening has left over. Part 15. The Gossip Network faster than a town crier, more accurate than rumor. Forget the official channels of medieval information. The town crier, the church notice board, the letter that arrives 3 weeks after the event it describes. The real news infrastructure of medieval urban life runs through places like this brothel, and it runs fast. By the time a piece of information has been introduced into the house, it has been processed, evaluated, embellished, redistributed, and delivered to its final audience in about the time it takes to walk from one table to the next. The staff are the network. Each position in the house offers a different information access point. The kitchen worker hears what's said when people are relaxed and waiting for food. The night shift absorbs conversations conducted in the dark by people who feel invisible. The person doing laundry handles the physical evidence of where people have been and what they were wearing when they were there. The madam stands at the center of all these tributaries, receiving everything and deciding what to do with it. The currency is reciprocal. A good piece of gossip earns a better bowl of stew. A confirmed rumor is worth a seat near the fire. Information is traded with the same negotiating instincts applied to everything else here. You assess the value, you consider your leverage, and you make a deal that leaves you ahead. Nothing is too small to enter the network. A merchant's unusual financial behavior. A priest spotted somewhere that requires explanation. The mayor's recurring accidental presence in the neighborhood. A nobleman's disguise evaluated and disassembled in real time. The velvet cap, the specific quality of those boots, the way he orders drinks. By midnight, his identity is known by everyone in the building, and by breakfast it will be known by everyone in the district. The amplification system is automatic and enthusiastic. A minor incident becomes significant through retelling. A significant incident becomes legendary. By the time a piece of news has been through its third telling, it has acquired characters, motivations, dramatic timing, and a conclusion that the original participants would be genuinely surprised to recognize. Facts are a starting point, not a destination. Animals participate in their way. Brutus positions himself near conversations of interest and has been observed moving closer to ongoing negotiations with an attentiveness that people choose to interpret as coincidence. The cats are everywhere and notice everything in the specific way of creatures that make no sound and leave no trace. If the goat's wandering seems to correlate with interesting events, that might be coincidence. It might not be. The madam uses the network as a tool. She knows what's being said, who said it, and what they didn't say that's more important than what they did. She knows which secrets are being kept from her and by whom. She knows the shape of the things people are trying to hide by the way they move around the space those things occupy in conversation. And she chooses, deliberately, what she deploys and when. For everyone else, the gossip network is social life in its most fundamental form. It's how alliances form, how warnings travel, how belonging is established. In a world without any of the communication infrastructure, we take for granted knowing things and sharing things with the right people at the right time is both a survival skill and a source of pleasure. Part 16. Faith and guilt both always present, neither ever winning. In medieval Europe, religion is not a Sunday activity. It is the operating system, running in the background of everything, structuring time, explaining suffering, promising consequences, and demanding regular accounting. For people working in a brothel, this creates a specific condition. Living every day in full awareness of the official position on what you're doing, and continuing to do it anyway, and holding these two realities in the same head simultaneously. The local priest holds both roles, regular presence in the building and regular condemnation of the building from the pulpit. On Sunday mornings, his sermon arrives at its inevitable destination, a pointed reference to the den of wickedness, the shadow of sin, the gathering of the lost. He doesn't name names. He doesn't have to. The congregation knows where he's looking even when he isn't looking. The workers who attend church, and many do, because church attendance is both social expectation and genuine practice, sit through this with the specific stillness of people who have decided to absorb the words without responding to them publicly. They dress appropriately. They bow their heads at the right moments. Some of them sing in the choir, calculating correctly that nothing communicates spiritual sincerity like a well-executed high note. Prayer exists in multiple forms and moments throughout the house. Before the shift, requesting protection. After it, requesting forgiveness for specifics. In the middle of the night, in the dark and the quiet, in the simple, honest form of someone talking to whoever might be listening about the actual situation of their actual life. No performance involved. Just the private negotiation between a person and their faith about how these things are supposed to add up. Confession is an exercise in creative ambiguity. The details are offered in the most general possible vocabulary. I was less than virtuous in my conduct, covers an enormous amount of ground without specifying any of it. The priest, who has heard enough of these to recognize the genre, assigns penance and moves on. The number of prayers specified sometimes suggests that he's running some kind of participation optimization scheme, but this is uncharitable and also probably accurate. And then there are the priests who move through the house in a different mode, less official, more human. The ones who stop in the kitchen doorway and hand over bread without making it a transaction. The ones who say, "We're all figuring it out," in a way that sounds like they mean it. These moments are small. They're not solutions to anything, but they carry weight in a life where judgment arrives from too many directions with too much confidence. Faith serves a function that goes beyond the institutional. In a world where illness comes without warning, where tomorrow's stability is entirely uncertain, where the law can shift on you without notice, the capacity to hope in something is a practical resource. Lucky objects, patron saints, specific prayers for specific situations, the small rituals that frame the day and give it structure, these aren't superstition in opposition to faith. They're faith in its most direct form. The human attempt to maintain connection with something that persists beyond what can be seen and measured and controlled. Even in a place that sits in official contradiction with the religious structures of its time, the faith itself lives. Imperfect, complicated, sometimes more question than answer, but alive. Part 17. Unwanted Guests, the ONES with Other Agendas. Not every visitor arrives because they want what the brothel officially provides. Some arrive because they need a specific kind of cover, others because they're looking for something or someone. A few because the building's complex social traffic makes it the most useful place in the district to conduct business that benefits from not being conducted anywhere visible. These guests shift the atmosphere in ways that everyone feels before anyone can explain. The noble on a mission arrives in disguise. The disguise is always bad. The specific failure point varies. Usually it's the shoes, sometimes the quality of the fabric, occasionally the way they hold their body in a space where deference is not assumed, but the result is consistent. Within about 4 minutes, everyone in the room has evaluated the disguise, reached a conclusion, and decided to maintain the fiction anyway, because there's no upside to confronting a nobleman badly disguised as a tradesman unless you're the madam, who may or may not be doing so privately and financially. These visitors are watching for something: a rival, a relative, a specific piece of information being exchanged. They position themselves in corners. They order drinks they don't consume. They listen with a focused intensity that is itself a signal. The smart response is to become suddenly very busy with uninteresting tasks and let them watch whatever they came to watch without anyone contributing anything useful to the observation. The spy is harder to identify in the moment and usually identified only in retrospect, when the thing they were listening for has moved on and consequences have arrived. They ask questions with the easy curiosity of a traveler making conversation, and you find yourself answering before you've decided to, because the questions are structured to feel low stakes. What do people say about the new grain prices? Does the mayor come through here often? What do the soldiers talk about when they've been drinking long enough? These questions connect to something. By the time you understand the shape of what they connected to, the person asking them is 2 days gone and unreachable. The recruiter is identifiable by enthusiasm. They arrive with promises of adventure, payment, glory, and conditions that will be significantly better than whatever your current situation is. They're looking for people with nothing to lose, which means people here are a target demographic. The experienced workers have a standard response to recruitment pitches: immediate development of a pressing task elsewhere, or a very detailed account of what happened to the last person who signed on with a similar offer. That person is usually the cook's cousin, and they spent 6 weeks doing something miserable for considerably less than promised. The blackmailer is the most serious of the unwanted categories. These individuals come quietly and leave quietly, and in between they take inventory. A glimpsed letter, an overheard name, a specific customer's presence on a specific evening. They collect without drawing attention and deploy what they've collected later, at a distance, against whoever can pay most to have it not deployed. The house defenses against this category are social and preemptive. Everyone watches for unusual attentiveness, unusual note-taking, or unusual questions. The information that actually matters moves through channels that look like something else. On the nights when these visitors are present, the common room develops a specific feeling. Conversations become shorter. Laughter is genuine but less spontaneous. The natural flow of the evening runs through a filter it doesn't usually require. Customers sense it without nomming it and find pressing reasons to leave earlier than planned. By morning, the unusual guest has moved on. The house exhales. The information assessment begins. What did they hear? What did they see? What does it mean? And what preemptive action is appropriate? The madam runs this analysis with the focused attention she brings to the ledger, building a picture from partial evidence and deciding what to do with it. In a world where information is power, and the brothel is one of the places where information concentrates, this kind of attention is not paranoia. It's maintenance. Part 18. medicine creative, optimistic, and occasionally effective. We've touched on health. Let's go deeper into the actual treatments, because the gap between what's wrong and what's done about it is one of the most illuminating spaces in medieval daily life. The medical kit kept in the kitchen is a physical object that communicates everything about the available options. A jar of leeches in various states of readiness, a bunch of dried herbs tied with string, a bottle of vinegar in its final third, a wooden spoon that serves medical purposes when it isn't serving cooking purposes, and a collection of small cloth bags containing things that smell strong and have documented histories of either helping or at least making the patient feel that something was being done. Leeches are the starting point for most conditions involving anything that sounds like inflammation, excess, or blockage. The theoretical basis, that illness often involves imbalance and that removing some blood addresses imbalance, is internally consistent if you accept the premise, which medieval medicine does completely. The practical result is variable. For some conditions, the leech treatment removes some blood, which has no positive effect but also no significant negative effect, and the body recovers on its own while the leech gets the credit. For others, the situation is more complicated. The herb treatments are where things get genuinely interesting, because some of them actually work. Willow bark for pain and fever, genuine, real, containing the substance we now synthesize as aspirin. Honey for wound treatment, antimicrobial, actually effective at preventing infection when properly applied. Lavender for calming, mild but real effect on anxiety. These coexist with treatments that work entirely on confidence rather than chemistry. The specific prayer, the lucky charm, the ritual action that gives the patient something to do and the body time to do its own work. The onion is the house's all-purpose remedy and deserves special recognition for the breadth of its application. Bruise, rub with onion, bite, onion poultice, respiratory issue, onion in boiling water, breathe the steam, skin condition, onion directly applied, unexplained malaise, onion in various forms until something improves or the onion supply runs out. Whether the onion is responsible for subsequent recovery or the body was already recovering is a question nobody asks, because the treatment costs almost nothing, and doing something feels better than doing nothing. For the specific category of conditions that the brothel generates in higher than average quantities, the kind that arrive with customers from all over the region and have been accompanying human intimacy since before recorded history, the available treatments are less effective and more expensive. The apothecary's specialty preparations in this area are priced as if they work better than they do, which is a commercial arrangement the apothecary has found sustainable. The treatments mask symptoms more reliably than they address causes, which is medieval medicine's general approach to the whole category of things we don't yet understand. The barber surgeon makes house calls when the situation genuinely requires someone with tools and the willingness to use them. Tooth removal is the most common service, medieval dental care being what it is, which is to say essentially non-existent as prevention and extremely active as emergency response. The extraction process is fast, effective, and memorable, conducted without anesthetic except the kind that comes in a cup. Recovery is measured in days rather than hours, and is considered successful if the relevant area stops doing what it was doing before the procedure. Surgery in the modern sense is reserved for situations where the alternative is clearly worse. When it happens, the preparation involves alcohol for the patient, a binding for the relevant area, and the clear communication that speed is a virtue in this specific context. The results are genuinely mixed and are documented primarily through the survivors, who are enthusiastic in their description of the experience and moderate in their recommendation of it. What the brothel's informal medical infrastructure actually provides most effectively is attention. Someone checks on you. Someone prepares something, even if that something is largely theatrical. Someone sits with you through the worst parts. In a world where formal medical care is expensive, distant, and often not significantly more effective than what the kitchen can produce. The human element of care, being seen, being tended to, being told it will probably be all right, has real value. It doesn't cure anything, but it makes the experience of being ill less lonely, and that turns out to matter more than it should have to. Part 19. Petty crime, everyone supplementing their income. In a building where wages are thin, expenses are constant, and the concept of surplus is theoretical, a certain amount of creative redistribution of available resources is simply part of the operating environment. Nobody calls it theft. Nobody calls it anything publicly. But everyone operates with the awareness that things in this building have complex ownership situations and tend to travel. Your purse is your primary responsibility. The workers who have been here more than a week have developed a system, purse tied to the body, covered by a second layer of clothing, and sat upon when possible. The precautions are not paranoid, they're calibrated. The average arrival time of a coin from customer's pocket to unknown destination, if unguarded, is under 20 minutes on a busy night. Shoes are an active market. The demand seems disproportionate given that most available shoes are battered, damp, and aggressively functional at best. But footwear in medieval Europe is expensive relative to income, difficult to replace, and valuable as trade. A pair that disappears from the entrance might reappear on someone 2 streets over, or get traded for something more useful, or simply never be seen again. The experienced guest enters the building with their shoes attached to their person, and exits the same way. Food is the other constant. The general principle is that unattended food has entered communal territory and is subject to community resolution. The specific application of this principle is that if you put down your crust and look away, you may not have a crust anymore, and the redistribution will have happened too smoothly to trace. The kitchen staff maintain professional standards about what leaves the kitchen officially. What happens between kitchen and table is a different jurisdiction. Brutus, whose role in formal security we've covered, operates a parallel informal security concern that is entirely personal and food adjacent. He doesn't steal in any meaningful sense. He simply applies his physical presence to the space between an unattended food item and its continued existence, and the mathematics resolve themselves. Everything he acquires is genuinely investigated before consumption, which is its own kind of thoroughness. When something significant goes missing, the house response is theatrical and communal. Accusations spread in expanding circles. Alliances form briefly around shared suspicion and dissolve when the next piece of evidence points elsewhere. The actual responsible party usually joins the investigation with visible enthusiasm, because participating in the search is the best available cover for having conducted the activity the search is about. The madam maintains a recovered items collection behind the bar, a wooden box containing everything that's been found, confiscated, turned in as suspiciously acquired, or simply been present long enough that nobody remembers whose it was. Rings. A glove without its partner. Something described as a key to something nobody can identify. A jar of pickled onions with a complicated history that nobody will explain. If you're missing something, checking the box is step 1. Step 2 is accepting that it may not be there. The social management of petty theft is as interesting as the theft itself. Open accusation is risky. You might be wrong, and being wrong publicly has costs. Silent escalation, arranging situations where the responsible party's behavior becomes obvious without direct confrontation, is preferred. The madam handles confirmed cases with consequences calibrated to the severity and the history of the individual. Latrine duty for first offenses, increasingly uncomfortable assignments for subsequent ones, and for genuine serial offenders, the specific punishment of being required to sit with the madam and listen to a detailed account of every instance she's documented, which is somehow worse than everything else. The general philosophy is that poverty makes thieves, that everyone here is poor, and that the line between taking and borrowing and finding is genuinely blurry when you don't have enough. This doesn't mean nobody minds. It means the reaction is practical rather than moral, and the goal is equilibrium rather than justice. Part 20. The ANIMALS staff ROMMATS and CRITICS. The animals in the medieval brothel are not pets. They're not decorative. They're not even optional, exactly. They've simply been here long enough that their presence is structural, and removing them would require more effort than anyone is willing to invest. They serve multiple functions simultaneously: pest control, temperature regulation, alarm system, entertainment, and emotional support in the specific form available to creatures that have no social obligation to pretend anything is fine when it isn't. The goat has his corner. We've established this. What bears elaborating is the scope of his personality, which is substantial. He has opinions about everything and communicates them through a range of vocalizations that workers have learned to read with accuracy. The short bleat is mild commentary, the sustained low sound is disapproval, and the specific sound he makes when someone is singing badly is so pointed that it effectively functions as critical review. He is judgmental in the way that only an animal who has watched humans make the same mistakes continuously for years can be judgmental, with the weary precision of long experience. He is also genuinely useful. His presence near the entrance on cold nights may or may not deter actual threats, but it definitely deters people who are uncertain about whether they want to be here, which serves a filtering function. His consumption of things that should not be left unattended is consistent enough to function as a quality control mechanism. If the goat won't eat it, the question of whether anyone else should is worth considering. The chickens are the alarm system. Every unfamiliar footstep, every door opening at an unusual hour, every approach that deviates from the normal patterns of the building, produces a response from the chickens that is impossible to ignore and arrives before any human has processed what triggered it. This is operationally useful and personally exhausting, since the threshold for unusual, in a place that never fully quiets, is lower than anyone would prefer. They are also early morning inevitable, roosting where they choose, relocating across human bodies in the pre-dawn hours, and announcing sunrise with an enthusiasm that is not calibrated to anyone's preferences but their own. Brutus as a roommate is a different proposition than Brutus as a security operative. His sleeping spot selection is optimized for his comfort and indifferent to yours. Whatever is softest currently becomes his. If that's your blanket, you have the option of retrieving it or not, and not is usually what happens. He snores. He dreams actively with running sounds and twitching, and his dreams are apparently high stakes. He radiates warmth in the winter in ways that make these complications worth tolerating. And in summer, he finds the coolest available surface and spreads across it with democratic completeness. His emotional expressiveness is an underrated feature of the house. He knows when someone is having a bad night in the way that dogs know things, through some combination of observation and whatever else they're doing that we don't have words for, and his response is to position himself nearby and remain available. He doesn't require anything from you. He just stays. The cats are mercenaries. They provide genuine service in the form of rodent management, which would otherwise consume the household's resources and nerves in equal measure. In exchange, they take the best sleeping spots when Brutus isn't in them, eat from the kitchen's output when the opportunity presents, and make themselves available for human comfort exclusively on terms they determine. You can't hold a cat in this house. You can sit where the cat decides to sit. Sometimes these coincide. The rat population, despite the cats, remains robust. The rats and the cats have apparently reached some agreement about territorial boundaries that allows both to operate with minimal direct conflict. The rats hold the walls and most of the floor. The cats own everything above ankle height. The chickens consider the ceiling theirs by right of being able to reach it and spending time there. The goat has his corner. Brutus has everything he wants. The humans have whatever's left. Part 21. Love, the terrible idea everyone keeps having. It happens. Despite every reason it shouldn't, the setting, the context, the explicit professional framing of every interaction, the madam's firmly stated policy on the subject, people fall in love in the medieval brothel with a persistence that suggests the emotion isn't particularly concerned with appropriate timing or location. It usually arrives through a side door, not the dramatic declaration, though those happen too. More often it's the accumulation of small things, a specific joke that lands differently than jokes usually land, a moment when someone forgets to perform and just exists, the habit of looking for one particular person when you enter a room. The workers have seen this process in customers often enough to recognize it early, the shift from casual to attentive, the suddenly increased tipping, the questions that are trying to ask something other than what they literally say. The experience of being on the receiving end of romantic attention in this context is complicated, genuine and unwanted in equal measure, requiring navigation that is both kind and honest, and sometimes failing to be both simultaneously. Occasionally, and this is where it gets genuinely interesting, it's mutual. The madam's position on this is well documented and frequently stated. Romance in the house is operationally inconvenient, emotionally expensive, and professionally destabilizing. A jealous customer creates problems. A worker in love becomes unreliable in ways that cost everyone. She has seen it end badly enough times to have strong opinions, and she shares them without being asked. She is also regularly wrong about specific cases, in ways she never acknowledges. The love stories that actually happen in this building are not the ones from ballads. They don't have the dramatic architecture of the songs that get sung here at midnight. They're smaller, a running joke that exists between two people and nobody else, the specific comfort of someone who knows what you're actually like under the performance and finds that version acceptable, the private calculation that this particular person makes the building feel different. These quiet versions are more durable than the declarations. The customer who arrives with a poem and flowers has usually moved on by the following month. The shared understanding built over many ordinary evenings, that's harder to displace. The heartbreak is also quiet and real. Someone leaves for another town and doesn't come back. Someone meets circumstances that make continuing impossible. Someone simply grows away from what they were when this started. The mourning is private because public mourning creates awkward working conditions, and because this isn't a place that has developed customs for this specific kind of loss. What the house actually provides for these situations is the same thing it provides for everything: company, distraction, someone to sit with in the dark while things are bad, and eventually the insistence, gentle or blunt depending on the madam's assessment of the moment, that morning comes. Work continues, and the capacity to survive bad things is something you already have. The goat is famously unmoved by human romantic suffering and will eat your love letter if you put it down. This is either a comment on the situation or just goat behavior, probably both. Part 22. The wardrobe malfunction and ongoing emergency. The dress code situation we covered. Now let's discuss the operational failure mode of that dress code, which is, everything eventually comes undone at the wrong moment. Buttons, as established, are rare. Laces are everywhere. This seems like it should be fine. Laces are functional. Laces can be tightened and loosened as needed. Laces are the flexible solution to the garment closure problem. Laces are also, under the conditions present in this building, an active hazard. They catch on furniture. They tangle in hair. They develop knots with the specific stubbornness of things that have been knotted before and remember it. They snap at the moment of greatest inconvenience with a reliability that begins to feel intentional. A lace that was fully functional at the beginning of the shift develops structural concerns by the middle of it and reaches its conclusion by the end. The wardrobe malfunction is not an occasional event here. It is a regular one. Workers develop the quick change skill, The ability to address a catastrophic lace failure fast enough that the professional situation doesn't also become a personal one. The skill is practiced enough to be nearly automatic. The speed achieved would impress observers who didn't understand what they were watching. The handyman, the person responsible for maintaining the physical condition of the building and everything in it, has evolved a secondary specialization in garment emergency. He carries spare lace. He can untangle a knot that has been developing for 3 hours in under 2 minutes. He has seen everything and responds to nothing with surprise, which is the professional quality that makes him irreplaceable. His calm in the face of textile crisis has a steadying effect on people who are considerably less calm. Customer wardrobe malfunctions are separately entertaining and more frequent than you'd expect. Ale affects coordination. Unfamiliar lacing systems in dim light create challenges. There's a specific combination of factors that results in a customer requiring assistance with something that was supposed to be simple, and this assistance is provided with the straight-faced professionalism of someone who is definitely not going to describe this to anyone later, until their shift ends. Then, it's a story. The garment sharing that happens in the house means every malfunction has potential to affect more than one person. If you borrowed this shift from someone, its structural weaknesses are inherited along with its temporary ownership. The person you borrowed from knows exactly where the weak points are, because they've dealt with them, and the information transfer at time of borrowing is "here it is," rather than "here is a comprehensive assessment of its lace infrastructure." Learning happens experientially. The communal response to a wardrobe emergency is immediate and practical. Someone brings the needle. Someone else holds things in place. A third person stands in the way of whatever you don't want witnessed while the repair happens. Nobody asks questions. The solidarity is real and the execution is fast. This is what functioning community looks like in practice. The automatic response to someone's problem with the specific skills and resources that are available. Part 23. Ghost Stories because the night needs something extra. The candles are low. The last of the ale is stretching itself thin. The customers who were going to leave have left. And the ones who remain have settled into the comfortable stasis of people who have committed to being here a while longer. This is when the stories come out. The ones that have been circulating in the house since before anyone currently present arrived. Every brothel in every medieval city has its permanent ghost. This one has several. The unpaid guest is the foundation legend. He arrives in slightly different form depending on who's telling the story. Sometimes a swaggering merchant confident in his ability to charm his way out of obligations. Sometimes a young tradesman who genuinely intended to pay and simply made a series of increasingly bad decisions. The details change. The ending doesn't. He left without settling accounts, and the metaphysics of the situation, the deep wrongness of a debt unpaid in a house that runs on precise accounting, bound him here. He can still be heard, apparently, on stormy nights. The faint sound of coins being counted in rooms that are empty, the soft, frustrated sound of someone whose purse isn't adding up to what they need. The madam finds this story useful. She has been known to reference it when explaining late payment policies. The lovesick monk is the sadder legend. He came for soup, or so the story begins, the careful distancing that allows the story to be told without the teller acknowledging any of its implications. He stayed too long. He felt too much. He made promises that his situation made impossible to keep. And so he remains, the source of unexplained drafts, blankets moved in the night, candles that go out when no wind is present. Workers who have lost something small, a pin, a bit of ribbon, a piece of bread, sometimes say the monk took it, is still looking for a way to make things right, is expressing some transaction that couldn't be completed in life. The weeping woman in the attic requires a specific note before any discussion. Nobody goes to the attic alone. This is structural policy. Whether it's because of what's up there or because the attic floor has questionable integrity is something that has never been resolved, because the policy prevents the investigation that would resolve it. She weeps on cold nights. She brings a chill that has nothing to do with weather. The cat has hissed at the ceiling on multiple occasions, in a way that workers interpret as confirmation, and the more skeptical interpret as the cat being a cat. The practical function of these stories is clear and interesting. In a place where strange noises are constant, where the building itself makes sounds that require explanation, where exhausted people in low light experience things that benefit from narrative framing, the ghost story provides structure. The sound in the wall is the monk. The cold draft is the weeping woman. The missing item is the unpaid guest working out his cosmic debt. This is better than the alternatives, which involve admitting that the building is old and poorly maintained, and that the rats are actively organizing. The stories also create continuity. Each worker who has been here for any time adds to the collection, receives it from those who came before, and passes it forward. The ghosts are the house's memory of itself, the accumulated weight of everything that happened before any current occupant arrived, given shape and name and story. And when a newcomer hears these stories for the first time, huddled near the fire while the older workers tell them with the straight face of people who have decided to commit fully to the telling, the experience is initiation. You're being given the house's mythology. You're being welcomed into the tradition of it. The ghost stories aren't about fear. They're about belonging to a place with a past long enough to have its own legends. Part 24. BIRTHDAYS, ELECTONS, Family VISITS, and RIVALS, the social calendar. The brothel has a richer social life than most institutions twice its size, organized around events that combine genuine celebration with the chaotic energy of a place that does everything at maximum intensity. Birthdays are celebrated on an approximate date determined democratically, since specific birth records are not something anyone here has access to. The celebration begins in secret, which in this building means about 6 people know and have agreed not to tell, which holds for approximately 2 hours. Someone bakes something. Bakes is generous. Someone locates the least stale bread, applies flour in confidence, and produces something that occupies the approximate roll of cake in the evening's proceedings. The crown is assembled from materials on hand, ribbons, wild flowers acquired from adjacent gardens whose owners were not consulted, and structural elements that are mostly wishful thinking. It is placed on the birthday person's head with ceremony. It immediately tilts. Nobody adjusts it. The tilt is part of the tradition at this point. The madam gives a speech. It is part roast and part battle cry, delivered with the affection of someone who communicates care primarily through competence and only occasionally through actual warmth. The workers cheer. Brutus investigates for edible components. The goat attempts to consume the crown and is redirected with a turnip. The games that follow pin the tail on the goat high risk. The relay race with ale mugs chaotic. And guess who ate the last apple never resolved. Exist primarily as permission to be ridiculous for an evening, which is itself the gift. Elections happen when the mood is right and someone needs a distraction. The position being contested, house favorite, comes with bragging rights, a second-hand tiara, and the dubious honor of organizing the next laundry schedule. Campaigning is immediate and comprehensive. Soap privileges are promised. Breakfast priority is pledged. The goat is nominated as a joke every cycle and consistently polls higher than the joke deserves, which says something about the electorate. The voting process is informal and irregularly transparent. Ballots are written on scraps of whatever's available and submitted to a counting process that is interrupted at least once per election by an animal, a customer, or weather. Runoffs are decided by arm wrestling, dice, or sing-off, judged by the goat. The winner governs from a position of popular mandate that lasts until the next complaint about the stew. Family visits are announced by a specific knock, the hesitant double tap of someone bringing pie and questions. The response is immediate and sophisticated. Everyone assumes cover roles. Anything incriminating moves behind the nearest surface, and the guest book is secured. The transformation from actual to official version of the house takes approximately 90 seconds on a good day. The visiting aunt or cousin is welcomed with warmth that is genuine and hospitality that is strategic. Questions are answered in the vague vocabulary of people who have prepared for this conversation. Guest relations is what Marjorie does. Will fixes things. The specifics of what things are never volunteered. The goat remains himself because the goat cannot be briefed. By the time the visitor leaves with their pie tin and their somewhat satisfied curiosity, the house has sweated through the performance and emerges relieved and entertained. The debrief lasts days. The best moments get added to the permanent archive of stories. Rival houses exist 2 streets over and provide the ongoing competitive context that keeps everyone sharp. The rivalry is conducted through small escalating exchanges. The switched signboard, the borrowed laundry, the strategic deployment of a blue-painted goat that became the district's most discussed story of the year and has never been officially attributed to anyone. Festival season transforms the competition into public spectacle. Both houses line their workers up on opposite sides of the street and conduct performances designed to demonstrate superiority in singing, dancing, insult delivery, and general audience management. The sing-offs are legendary. The food fights that sometimes follow are less legendary and more regrettable, and everyone cleans up very quickly when official attention approaches. And when that official attention arrives, when the church decides to have one of its crackdown moments and comes down the street with its authority assembled, both houses and every rivalry between them vanish into a unified front of innocent parties who have no idea what anyone is talking about and would very much like to offer everyone some soup. The blue goat was never mentioned again, officially. Part 25. The morning after survival, inventory, and the next night. Dawn comes whether you're ready or not. The light through the small windows shifts from black to gray to something that could charitably be called morning, and the building makes the slow, reluctant transition from night into day. The last candles are going out on their own. Brutus has achieved maximum horizontal spread near whatever warmth is left. The chickens are opinionated about sunrise in the specific way of creatures who believe everyone should be as awake as they are. The goat is already looking at you. You take inventory. This is the first activity of the morning and the most practical. Personal belongings, present, absent, relocated. New bruises, origin ranging from memorable to genuinely mysterious. Coins, count them now, count again, accept the number even if it's disappointing. Shoes, still yours, worn through the night for exactly this reason. The post-shift debrief happens over breakfast, which is pottage, always pottage, with bread at varying levels of structural integrity. The conversation is the exhausted but alive kind that only comes after surviving something together. Who had the strangest customer? Who handled the worst situation best? Whether the musician who showed up uninvited was actually worth the space he occupied. What happened to the second-best candle holder? There are coins to count in the official sense. The house's accounting, not just personal. The ledger gets updated. The deductions happen. What remains is distributed and immediately starts being mentally allocated to whatever it needs to cover next. The cleaning happens. The bedding gets sorted. The animals get fed in the order of their ability to express displeasure about not being first. Fresh rushes on the floor where they need it. The communal spaces reset from what last night made them into something that can receive tonight. And somewhere in here, in the gap between the end of what was and the beginning of what's next, there's a moment. Brief. Unremarkable from the outside. Just people sitting with the morning, with whatever warmth is available, with the specific quiet that follows sustained noise. The madam does her rounds. She notes who needs rest, who needs a word, who came through particularly well and deserves the acknowledgement of having it noticed. She doesn't say much in this morning mode. She doesn't need to. The fact of her presence still here, still running this thing, still the reason the roof is functionally over everyone's heads, is its own communication. By midday, the preparations for the evening have begun. By late afternoon, the house is running again. By nightfall, the door is open and the candles are lit, and whatever last night was, tonight is its own version of it. This is the rhythm. This is how it goes, not glamorous, not easy, frequently ridiculous, occasionally terrifying, surprisingly funny more often than any of it deserves. You survived another one. The stew is on, the goat is in his corner, Brutus is at the door. History, as it turns out, smells exactly like this. Part 26. Winter in the Brothel, when survival becomes the only priority. Winter arrives in the medieval brothel the way all bad news arrives here, without announcement, without sympathy, and with the specific intention of making everything that was already difficult significantly more so. The first sign is the cold coming through the walls. Not drafts exactly, though those exist in abundance, but the deeper cold that seeps through stone and wood and plaster and settles into the building like a permanent resident who hasn't paid and won't be leaving. The floors, which were merely uncomfortable in autumn, become actively hostile in winter. The straw in the mattresses loses whatever insulating properties it had and becomes a cold, crunchy surface that seems specifically designed to draw warmth out of whoever is lying on it. The fire in the main hearth becomes the most important object in the building. Everything and everyone orients toward it. The seating arrangement in the common room, which in warmer months is organized around social dynamics and sightlines, reorganizes entirely around proximity to the fire. The best spots nearest the flame develop a hierarchy of their own. The madam's unspoken claim to the warmest position is honored without discussion, followed by the workers who are between shifts and need to restore function to their extremities, followed by regular customers who have learned that maintaining preferred fire access requires consistent tipping and good behavior. Brutus claims his winter position early in the season and defends it with the passive resistance of something that simply cannot be physically moved without equipment and determination that nobody has. He radiates heat in winter in ways that make sharing his vicinity genuinely valuable, which creates an uncomfortable dynamic where the people most in need of his warmth also have to negotiate his complete indifference to their preferences about how much space he takes up. The goat becomes, against all expectations, more useful in winter. His corner near the fire is warm enough that small animals and occasionally people end up in proximity to him by necessity. He tolerates this with the specific graciousness of someone doing you a favor they expect to be remembered. His expression communicates that this arrangement is on his terms and subject to revocation without notice. Everyone operates accordingly. The wood problem. Firewood is the winter resource that everything else depends on, and it is never quite enough. The house maintains a supply that is adequate in the sense that it hasn't yet run out, but inadequate in the sense that rationing it is a constant calculation. How many logs tonight? How cold is it expected to be? How many people will be in the building generating their own warmth versus how much additional heat is needed from the fire? The person responsible for managing this calculation is usually whoever the madam trusts with the ledger equivalent for physical resources. Someone with the specific skill of knowing how much you actually need versus how much you think you need, and the authority to enforce the difference. Stealing firewood from the stack is the winter equivalent of stealing soap. Everyone knows it happens, nobody admits to it, and the person doing it believes they're doing it more secretly than they are. The madam's response to discovered firewood theft in winter is notably less gentle than her response to soap theft, because the stakes are different. Running short on soap is unpleasant. Running out of fire in January is dangerous. The clothing situation amplified. Every textile situation described earlier becomes more pressing under winter conditions. The threadbare linen that was marginally adequate in September is insufficient in December. The wool overdress that provided functional warmth in autumn is now being supplemented with whatever additional layers can be assembled from the available resources. Spare curtains folded into makeshift wraps, sections of old bedding repurposed as shawls, multiple pairs of socks layered on top of each other in the optimistic belief that quantity compensates for quality. The communal blanket system reaches its maximum complexity in winter. There are not enough blankets for everyone to have one. This is a fixed condition that winter makes acute. The negotiation for blanket access is ongoing, subtle, and occasionally not subtle at all. Priority goes to people who are sick, then to people who were working through the coldest hours of the night, then to whoever has the most compelling argument or the most persistent presence in the blanket-adjacent area. Sleeping arrangements in winter resolve toward maximum human density regardless of other preferences. The abstract commitment to personal space that survives in warmer months is abandoned entirely when the alternative is being cold. The communal sleeping pile, workers, animals, anyone who happens to be in the building at the moment warmth becomes a collective necessity, is a genuinely social phenomenon. People who would not choose each other's company in other circumstances end up pressed together by physics and temperature, and have conversations in the dark that they wouldn't have otherwise. Winter illness. The respiratory situation, which we've established as continuous in normal conditions, escalates significantly in winter. Cold air, enclosed spaces, reduced ventilation because opening windows makes the cold problem worse, and the arrival of customers carrying illness from elsewhere all combine into a season-long experience of the building processing multiple overlapping ailments simultaneously. The coughing becomes a constant ambient sound. It starts somewhere and moves through the house in a wave that takes about a week to complete. Nobody is fully well. Most people are functional. A few are genuinely ill and require the informal medical attention we've covered, amplified by the fact that winter illness is harder to recover from when you're already cold and sleeping on a straw mat that's lost all insulating properties. The treatments escalate accordingly. More boiled herbs, more vinegar applications, more onion in more forms. The hot drink made from whatever's available, warmed ale, heated water with dried herbs, something described as restorative that tastes specifically of desperation and overcooked root vegetables, circulates constantly through the sick areas. The madam manages this with the specific attention of someone who understands that a building full of ill workers is a business problem as well as a human one. She makes the calculation that keeping people functional enough to work requires investing in their recovery, which means the medical supplies get used, the fire gets fed, and the good blanket gets allocated without its usual competitive negotiation when someone is genuinely unwell. Winter customer behavior. The clientele changes in winter in ways that affect everything else. Travelers arrive in worse condition, colder, more exhausted, carrying more illness, and with less patience for the normal social frictions of the house. They want warmth before anything else, and the proximity of the fire is the first amenity they're paying for even if they don't articulate it that way. Soldiers passing through in winter are bleaker than their summer counterparts. The campaigns don't stop entirely in cold weather, but they become more miserable, and the men who come in from them carry that misery with them in ways that require careful management. The workers develop winter-specific skills, providing warmth without demanding conversation, allowing silence to be companionable rather than uncomfortable, knowing when someone needs to sit near the fire and be left alone with a cup of something hot. The merchants who appear in winter are the ones whose business brings them through regardless of season, the ones who can't simply not travel because the roads are frozen. They're frequently desperate in small ways, and desperation creates both generosity and difficulty in roughly equal measure. The generosity is useful. The difficulty requires the management skills that the house staff develop over years of practice. The Winter Festival. Somewhere in the middle of winter, the timing varies based on the religious calendar, and whoever is currently tracking it, there's a festival. not just in the brothel but throughout the city. And in the brothel's version of it, the usual restrained celebration reaches something closer to full expression. More fuel goes on the fire than the careful calculation normally permits. The ale that's been saved for something good makes its appearance. The kitchen produces something that qualifies as festive by the available standards, more generous portions, an ingredient that doesn't usually appear, the specific effort that says this night is different from the ordinary nights even if only slightly. The singing that normally stops at midnight continues past it, and the rule is informally suspended because everyone needs it. The dancing that breaks out is genuine rather than performative, the specific kind that happens when people are cold and need warmth that comes from movement and from proximity, and from the specific joy of doing something together that exists entirely in this moment. The candles burn down, the fire dies to coals, people sleep where they are, layered together, warm enough, alive. Winter passes eventually, as it always does. But for the weeks that it holds the building in its grip, the people inside it discover what's actually load-bearing about the place. Not the structure, not the rules, not the economics, but the simple fact of being together in a cold world with enough heat to survive it. Part 27. Summer, a different kind of misery. Winter is cold misery. Summer is hot misery. The medieval brothel is not a place that offers comfortable middle seasons. The transition between frozen and sweltering is brief and often involves mud. Summer arrives with a heat that has nowhere to go. The building was designed to hold warmth in winter, which means in summer it holds everything with the same indiscriminate commitment. The small windows provide insufficient exchange of air. The bodies, workers, customers, animals generate their own heat in a space that is already warm and getting warmer. By midsummer, the interior temperature reaches levels that make the word sweltering feel like an understatement you'd use about somewhere else. The smell situation, which we have covered at length and which exists year-round, reaches its annual peak in summer. Everything that was merely present in cooler months becomes emphatically present when the temperature rises. The floor rushes ferment slightly. The animals are more aromatic. The general human condition of the building, which is never far from the surface, rises decisively to the surface. The sleeping arrangements that winter forced into maximum density reverse entirely in summer. The communal warmth that was survival in January is actively unwanted in July. People stake out the maximum possible personal space, which is still not much, but the aspiration is there. The curtains that nominally divide the sleeping areas are supplemented with whatever can be arranged to create airflow. Positioned at angles to capture the small amount of breeze available through the single window, maintained at precise configurations that someone worked out through trial and error, and gets quietly upset about when anyone moves them. The chickens, who manage winter with characteristic stoicism, have opinions about summer heat that they express continuously and without apparent concern for anyone else's experience. They find every patch of shade in the building and compete for it with the determination of creatures who understand that shade is finite and valuable. Their relationship with the goat deteriorates in summer as they compete for the best-positioned corners, and the resulting disputes have a sound that carries through the building in ways that interfere with any attempt at midday rest. Summer pests. If winter brings respiratory illness, summer brings everything that flies. The flea and lice situation, already well established, expands in summer to include flies, mosquitoes, and various other insects who find the brothel's combination of warmth, organic material, and multiple food sources an ideal environment. The communal scratching that was a background constant becomes more foreground in summer, conducted with greater urgency and less social pretense. The kitchen in summer is a particular challenge. The same fire that is life-giving in winter becomes a punishment in summer. Cooking requires feeding a fire in an already hot room while managing food that spoils faster than in cooler months. The pottage that simmers without urgent concern about food safety in January requires more careful attention in July. The question of whether something is still good becomes more pressing when warmth is accelerating whatever process answers it in the wrong direction. The cook manages this with the competence of someone who has been managing it for years, knowing what can stay on the fire safely and for how long, what needs to be consumed same day, what can be stretched, and what cannot. Her authority in the kitchen, always substantial, becomes absolute in summer because the consequences of overriding her judgment become more immediately obvious. Summer business. Business changes character in summer. The desperate warmth-seeking of winter customers is replaced by a different kind of customer, travelers making better time on the roads, merchants in more active trading season, soldiers moving through in larger numbers during campaign season. The house is busier, the turnover faster, the energy more chaotic. Festival season that summer brings adds its own demands. The city conducts more public life outside in summer, which means more activity on the streets around the brothel, more potential customers passing, more noise from the surrounding environment mixing with the noise generated internally. The line between inside and outside blurs in summer, the door stays open more often, the chickens range further, the goat occasionally makes bids for freedom that require retrieval from increasingly distant locations. The madam manages summer with a different emphasis than winter. Winter requires keeping everyone warm enough to survive. Summer requires keeping everyone from becoming too overwhelmed to function, which is a more distributed problem. She circulates more in summer, monitoring the energy of the building, intervening in conflicts that the heat makes more likely, maintaining the social equilibrium that's easier to lose when everyone is uncomfortable and the night refuses to cool. The summer bath situation. The bath barrel in the yard achieves its maximum social significance in summer. In winter, it's used reluctantly and infrequently because the cold makes it genuinely unpleasant. In summer, access to it becomes genuinely competitive. The water is still communal and still not changed between bathers. But in summer this bothers people less because the water at least starts at a reasonable temperature, and the purpose is more clearly about reducing the ambient heat of the human body than about any comprehensive cleaning objective. The yard itself in summer is a social space in ways it isn't in other seasons. People take their breaks outside. Conversations happen in the small outdoor area behind the building. The animals prefer it to the indoors. The summer evenings, when the heat of the day starts to release and the air develops some movement, are genuinely pleasant in a way that the building itself can't replicate, and these hours acquire their own value as rest that the interior doesn't provide. Part 28. A day in the life hour by hour. Let's follow the building from before dawn to well past midnight, the way it actually moves through a full cycle. Before dawn. The rooster handles the announcement of this hour whether anyone wants him to or not. His conviction that sunrise requires vocal acknowledgement is absolute. The chickens agree with him in their own register. Brutus responds by shifting to a marginally more alert configuration without opening his eyes. The first person actually awake by choice is usually whoever is responsible for the fire, keeping the coals alive through the night so that morning doesn't require starting from nothing. This person has usually slept near the hearth, in the warmth they were responsible for maintaining, which is a reasonable exchange. They bank the fire against the night's end and begin the first preparations of the day. The kitchen starts before anyone else. The cauldron that will eventually be pottage begins its journey. Water is brought from the well, a task that happens early because the well is shared with the neighborhood and morning has the best access. Whatever food preparation the day requires starts in the pre-dawn quiet, which is the only quiet available in this building, and is used for exactly this purposeful efficiency. Dawn to mid-morning. This is the recovery period. People who worked through the night are sleeping, or attempting to, against the increasing brightness and noise of the building coming alive around them. The morning shift exists in a different relationship with the day. They're functional while the night workers are horizontal, moving through the space with the specific consideration of people who remember what it's like to need sleep and are choosing not to add to the noise. The accounts from the previous night get settled in this window. The madam reviews the ledger with the focused attention it requires. Workers collect what they're owed. The deductions we've discussed are applied. The coins move through their destinations. The lost and found box receives any items that appeared overnight without clear ownership. Breakfast happens in this period. The pottage is ready. The bread is cut or broken, depending on its current structural state. The meal is communal and functional, people eating because they need to, conversation happening, because it's the first time many of them have been in the same space since last night's chaos resolved into sleep. Midday. The building's quietest phase. Night workers are sleeping. Day preparations are underway but not yet urgent. The customers who will populate the evening hours are still in their other lives. The animals are at their lowest energy. This is when maintenance happens. The physical maintenance of the building, whatever broke last night, whatever needs attention before tonight, whatever has been deferred until there's time. The person whose unofficial role this is moves through the building with the specific focus of someone cataloging problems and triaging them against available resources. Personal maintenance also happens here. Laundry, in the limited sense available, clothing repair. The social equivalent, conversations that are honest rather than performed, relationships tended in the ordinary way of people who spend significant time together, the small negotiations of communal life conducted without the pressure of an active night around them. Late afternoon. Preparation escalates. The kitchen moves into higher urgency. The fire gets fed more deliberately. Supplies are checked against anticipated need. The madam does her afternoon assessment, reading the current state of the house against the likely demands of the coming evening and adjusting whatever can be adjusted. Workers who will be on for the night shift begin their own preparation. This is more than physical. It's the mental shift from the private self that exists in the quiet hours to the working self that operates in the full noise of an active night. The performance face goes on, not dishonestly, but as a tool, the practiced smile, the readied energy, the specific social skills that the work requires. The early customers begin to arrive. The merchants who get off the road before dark, the locals who time their visits to avoid the peak hours, the regulars who have their preferred routines and maintain them with the dedication of people who find comfort in consistency. The building absorbs them, the evening begins, and the night's character starts to establish itself. Night. We've covered this in general. Let's note the specific arc. The first hour is arrival and establishment of the evening's energy. The second and third hours are the peak, the most customers, the most activity, the highest noise, the greatest demand on everyone working. The fourth hour starts the winding down for some while others are just finding their second wind. The post-midnight hours are their own specific experience. The customers who remain are the ones who were never going to leave early. The workers still present are managing these final hours with the sustained endurance that distinguishes the experienced from the new. The animals have largely found their positions for the night. The building settles into a lower register of activity that doesn't stop but changes texture. The hours before dawn. The night's last work. The final customers eventually leave or accept that they're staying until morning. The counting, the cleaning, the resetting of things that can be reset. The conversations that happen in this final window, honest, tired, occasionally funny, sometimes surprisingly deep, between people who have just been through the same long night together. Sleep arrives finally for whoever can get to it. The fire is banked. The candles that haven't already gone out are snuffed. The building settles into something like rest, which is as close to silence as it ever gets, which is not very close but is its own kind of peace. The rooster, completely unaware of any of this, is already preparing for his dawn announcement. It will begin again. Part 29. What people actually talked about, the real conversations. We've covered the gossip, the ghost stories, the entertainment. But what about the ordinary conversation, the actual content of what people said to each other in the unguarded hours? Medieval people, it turns out, talked about the same things people always talk about. The surface topics were different. The underlying preoccupations were not. Money. Specifically, not having enough of it, what to do about that, what the people who have more of it are doing with it, and whether that's fair, and what you would do if you had more. Medieval financial anxiety is structurally identical to modern financial anxiety. The gap between what's coming in and what's going out, the uncertainty of whether next month will be better or worse, the specific resentment of watching someone else navigate the same system more successfully. Workers in the brothel had sophisticated understandings of local economics from direct observation. They saw what the merchants had and what they spent. They knew which trades were doing well and which were struggling. They tracked the relationship between harvest quality and customer spending with the attention of people whose income directly reflected it. The conversation about money was practical, detailed, and conducted without the polite middle-class hesitation about discussing it. Health. Specifically, what was going around, who had it, how bad it was, what seemed to be working, what definitely wasn't working, whether the bad thing from last winter was coming back, and the specific worry about conditions that couldn't be discussed formally but needed to be managed practically. Health conversation in the brothel was frank in ways that weren't available elsewhere, because the shared experience created a shared vocabulary, and the shared interest in not infecting each other created genuine information exchange. Religion. Specifically, whether any of it was true, which parts seemed more likely than others, what God was actually paying attention to versus what was probably not being tracked, whether confession actually did what it was supposed to do, and what happened to people who died badly. These conversations happened in the dark, in low voices, with the specific freedom of people who had already placed themselves outside the official categories, and therefore had less to lose from honest theological uncertainty than people who needed to maintain a respectable religious reputation. The faith was real. The questions were also real. Both things coexisted with less tension than you might expect, because when your daily life requires that kind of cognitive flexibility, applying it to theological questions comes naturally. The future. Specifically, whether things would be different, what different would look like, whether leaving was actually possible or just something you thought about, what you would do if you did leave, and whether the life you're describing when you say, "what I do," is actually achievable or just a story you tell yourself that helps. These conversations were the most honest and the most complicated. The future is always the most complicated topic, because it exists entirely in possibility and therefore can hold anything, hope, fear, the specific longing for a version of your life that you're not currently living, the negotiation between what you want and what's available. Workers in the brothel had the same relationship with future thinking that everyone who is surviving difficult circumstances has. It is simultaneously necessary for morale and potentially dangerous for functioning. You need enough hope to keep going. Too much investment in the hoped-for alternative makes the actual present unbearable. The calibration of this was individual and ongoing, and was the subject of more conversation than any other topic. The people not present. Family mostly, left behind or left by. The versions of your life that existed before this one. The people who don't know where you are or what you're doing, and the complicated feelings that accompany both the distance and the decision to maintain it. Children, if you had them. Parents, if they were still alive. Siblings. The people whose faces you remembered most clearly in the specific clarity that comes with distance. These conversations happened less often and were handled more carefully. Opening that particular subject required trust and the right moment, and finishing it required the ability to come back from what it opened. But when they happened, They were the most fully human conversations. The building contained proof that everyone in this place was also somewhere else simultaneously, carrying a different life alongside this one. Part 30. The end of an era. What happened eventually? Medieval brothels didn't last forever. Nothing does. The specific configuration of any given house, its madam, its workers, its particular community of regulars and residents and animals, existed for a time and then ended, in ways both ordinary and dramatic. Some ended with the madam, when the person who held everything together decided she was done, or became unable to continue, or simply died, because medieval life had a shorter calendar than modern life for everyone. The institution rarely survived the transition. The knowledge, the relationships, the network of obligations and privileges and informal understandings that made the place work lived primarily in one person's head, and when that person was gone, the copy didn't transfer automatically. Some ended with fire. Medieval cities burned regularly. A city block could go in an afternoon, and brothels sat in the dense urban neighborhoods where fire traveled fastest. The wooden structures, the tallow candles, the always-present open flames, these were not a safe combination, and the history of medieval brothels is partially a history of buildings that one day simply weren't there anymore. Some ended with moral campaigns. The periodic crackdowns that were usually temporary would occasionally become permanent, when someone in authority had enough sustained motivation to actually close rather than just inconvenience. The church, the city, the nobility, when their interests aligned on shutting a place down, it got shut down, and the workers scattered to whatever was next. Some simply evolved. The building changed use. The neighborhood changed character. What was a brothel became something else gradually, over years, until the transition was complete, and the original function was just a memory that only the oldest residents of the district retained. The workers went on to whatever came next. Some found other work. Some moved to other cities. Some married in the complicated way that life offers complicated opportunities without asking whether the timing is convenient. Some simply continued, found another house, another madam, another configuration of the same basic situation in a different location. What persisted was the knowledge. Practical, specific, hard-won knowledge about how people work, what they need, how to manage conflict, how to survive with limited resources, how to create community in conditions that don't naturally support it. Workers who came out of a brothel and into other circumstances brought this with them. The things you learn running a communal household with difficult economics and complex social dynamics are genuinely transferable, even if the context that taught them isn't mentioned. The madams who lived long enough and accumulated enough left in various ways. Some had money saved carefully against exactly this eventuality. Some had relationships, the bailiff's childhood nickname, the bishop's donation habits, the magistrate's nephew's loyalty, that translated into protections in later life. Some simply had the force of personality that had always been their primary resource and continued deploying it in new directions. And the buildings themselves, the ones that didn't burn, became other things. Taverns, boarding houses, ordinary residences. The stains in the floors became ordinary old stains. The corner where the goat had his territory became someone's storage space. The curtain brackets remained on the walls long after the curtains were gone, mysterious to subsequent occupants who had no context for them. The rooster's descendants, presumably, were somewhere in the city for generations. Part 31. What history forgets and why it matters. The standard historical narrative moves through the medieval period at a certain altitude. It covers kings, battles, plagues, religious movements, architectural achievements, and economic shifts. It touches the lives of ordinary people in aggregate, peasants, merchants, craftspeople as categories, but it rarely slows down enough to sit in one room for long enough to know what it smelled like. The people who lived in places like the medieval brothel were real people, conducting real lives, with the same fundamental human needs and drives and complications that everyone always has. They worried about money and health in the future. They formed attachments. They had opinions about food. They argued about small things and talked quietly in the dark about large ones. They were funny, specifically, personally funny, the way real people are funny rather than the way historical figures are interesting. They were also largely invisible to the record. The documentation of medieval life preserved what the literate classes thought worth preserving: theological positions, legal frameworks, royal genealogies, property records. The interior life of a brothel worker in 1352, her specific thoughts about the bailiff's newest hat, her opinions about the goat's personality, the prayer she said before the shift, and whether she meant it the same way every time, these didn't make it into the archive. What we have instead is the structural evidence, the legal records that mention brothels when they were causing problems, the church records that describe their condemnation, the occasional memoir from someone adjacent to this world who paused to describe it, enough to reconstruct the shape of daily life, even if the specific texture is gone. The reconstruction matters because it's humanizing in a direction we need. Medieval people are easy to treat as pre-modern, as a category of historical actor who hadn't yet become the kind of person we recognize fully as human, because they lacked our technology, our medical knowledge, our sanitation, our legal protections, our communication infrastructure. The daily life of a medieval brothel corrects this in the most direct possible way. These were people managing the same fundamental human things we manage, under conditions considerably more difficult than ours, with considerably fewer tools, with humor and community and faith, and the specific creativity of people who can't afford to give up. The madam with her ledger and her wooden spoon was doing something genuinely difficult and doing it well. The workers navigating their relationships with customers, with each other, with the law, with their own complex feelings about the life they were living. They were doing something genuinely human. The goat was just the goat, but even he was part of a community that functioned, in its chaotic way, as a community. History is most useful when it lands at this level, not the grand arc but the specific moment. The morning after, the birthday celebration with the tilted crown, the conversation in the dark between people who didn't quite know each other's real names, the fire banked against the cold, the first light coming through the small window and the rooster's announcement of it, and the gradual return of another day. This is where people actually lived. Part 32. A final night falling asleep in 1352. It's late, later than it should be. The candles that haven't burned out are in their final hour, the flame low and uncertain, the pool of light they cast barely enough to find the edges of the room. The common room has emptied. The last customer left 20 minutes ago, still looking for his other boot which Brutus had been storing under his left paw for safekeeping since approximately midnight. The boot was recovered. The customer departed. The door closed. The kitchen fire is banked. Someone will tend it in a few hours when the coals need rebuilding, but for now it's enough, just enough heat radiating out to take the edge off the cold, just enough light from the embers to give the room a dim orange warmth. The animals have settled. Brutus occupies his winter position near the hearth, horizontal and absolute, his breathing deep and regular, occasionally interrupted by whatever he's chasing in his dreams. The goat is in his corner, eyes closed, the specific expression of dignified sleep that he maintains even unconsciously. The chickens are quiet on their roosts, which is its own kind of miracle, and will last until about an hour before anyone wants it to end. The workers who are sleeping are doing so with the thoroughness of people who have earned it. The shared room is warm enough with the combined heat of everyone in it, and the sounds of the building, settling wood, distant street noise, the particular music of a structure that's been standing through many winters, have become background rather than interruption. Someone is still awake. They usually are, sitting near the last useful candle, doing something small, mending a hem, counting coins one more time, just sitting. Thinking about the things people think about when the noise finally stops and the performance is over and there's nothing between you and your actual thoughts. Maybe thinking about tomorrow. Maybe thinking about a letter they should write to someone they left behind. Maybe thinking about nothing in particular, just existing in the quiet, which is its own kind of rest. Outside, the city continues its medieval nightlife at lower volume. Someone's dog, a late cart on the cobblestones, the watch making their rounds, the distant sound of the river which is always there, underneath everything, older than the city and indifferent to it. Inside, the candle flickers, catches, holds. The person still awake watches it for a moment, the small, reliable flame, burning in the cold, doing its simple, specific job of making light where there would otherwise be dark. Then they blow it out. The room goes entirely dark. And then gradually, as the eyes adjust, not entirely dark. The coals cast their dim orange. The moonlight through the small window contributes. The darkness resolves into shapes, the familiar geography of the room, the sleeping figures, the goat's corner, the door. Everything is exactly where it is. The city is still out there. The morning is coming. The rooster knows this and is already, somewhere in whatever roosters experience as consciousness, preparing for the announcement of it. But for now, quiet, the building breathing, everyone in it breathing, the fire just enough, the cold outside the walls doing what it does, and the warmth inside the walls doing what it does, and the thin line between them holding. This is the medieval brothel at 3 in the morning, in 1352. This is where people lived. Sleep well.